Or perhaps he will someone shoot a man before throwing him out of the plane. It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is the plan. I broke you. How you'll come back. And when it is truly done, when Gotham is ashes, then you have my permission to die.
I need a hobby. Okay, everybody. So welcome to this podcast. My name is Johnny. I'm the lone chemist, and with me is my good friend, the Raging Cajun Abdallah. Say hi, Abdallah, to the people.
Hello, people. I am also a lonely chemist, but in a different way.
It's lone, man, lone. I don't want to be too self-deprecating, but you know.
Lone chemist, okay. Fair enough.
So we're not really sure what the title of this podcast is going to be, but basically I'm going to have Abdallah sometimes in Skype, sometimes in person when he's here in Chicago, and we're just going to talk about anything that kind of comes to mind. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about movies, entertainment. We're going to talk about, anything that really interests us because little backstory, Abdallah and I were lab mates at one point in the same PhD lab in Northwestern, and our conversations were very fruitful, and we talked about many things, everything from dank memes to funny movies to political talk. And yeah, I think we've had a pretty intellectually stimulating relationship as friends, and we're going to extend that to a podcast that maybe people will want to listen to at some point, or maybe not, and we're just talking in a vacuum, but...
Yeah, well, we'll give it a best shot and see what happens.
Yeah, if anything, we'll just, be pretentious assholes, like just, back and forth with each other.
Absolutely. I am fine with just that.
All right, so I saw Infinity War last night. Abdallah saw it 2 days ago now. And
yep, Thursday night, right when it came out. Did not want to risk anybody spoiling anything for me.
I turned off my phone.
So as soon as it was available, I got in there.
Yeah, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. Yeah, I mean, 10 years of comic book lore and original lore, and if anything spoiled it, then I would be a very unhappy boy. But fortunately, nothing was spoiled for me. Even though there were some pretty funny memes about it on Instagram and Twitter. Like, did you see this thing on Twitter where it was like Infinity War spoilers without any context, and they had a thing where it's like a dustpan. And also spoilers for people listening. This is going to be a lot of spoilers in this talk, but they had like a picture of like Voldemort like fading away in the dust. They had a picture of a dustpan. They had a magician's glove, and then they had like some other thing. And they said like Infinity War spoilers, no context. And there were like hundreds of memes like with that, like just like random pictures of stuff that kind of relates to the movie. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, that Voldemort thing was spot on. That's exactly. I mean, it is exactly spot on. I think that's pretty clever on their part.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So before we get into specifics on Infinity War, which I have a lot to say about it, I think we're just going to talk about the MCU in general. I mean, this is 10 years of movies. They even changed up the logo in Infinity War to include the 10. So
yeah, I think that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a landmark thing. I mean, this is 10 years of this kind of storytelling that's really come to the forefront of entertainment. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, 10 years of them figuring it out, basically rewriting history, making history as they're going, and then seeing where it leads them. And, very ambitious project, not only on a movie sense, part of it was a big thing before this movie came out was what kind of, how are the actors going to be credited? What kind of order would they appear in? Because you've never had so many A-listers crammed into one movie. So, who gets the top billing? Where does this actor's name fall into place? And what are the factors that go into it? Do you look at the strength of the character? Do you look at the strength of the actor? Because some of them came in with multiple Oscar nominations. Some of them were novices when they started in the MCU. So, all of these different things, it's not just the hardcore fans waiting for, plot details to be revealed as they're watching, but any sort of movie watcher will have some type of thing to look forward to, and that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And I like what you said there about them taking risks, not only like the characters that are chosen and like the A-list celebrities, but they really took risks and casting people that weren't well known, but they had a lot of faith in them as actors. And I think the biggest example of that fitting in our conversation is Robert Downey Jr. Like Robert
Absolutely.
Downey Jr., when he was cast, he's an A-lister now, and everyone knew throughout his entire life he's an incredible actor, but following in 2005 or 6, when that whole incarceration thing happened and he finally got clean. And some people would say that they were taking kind of a risk with casting him in the movie, but he's an incredible actor, and he really is the glue that holds the franchise together, which it was a very smart move in their part. They could have picked somebody who's an A-lister right off the bat, but they had faith in him as a character actor, and I think it really paid off. I mean, RDJ is probably one of, if not the most lucrative actor that's working right now, and I think a lot of it has to do with not only his acting ability, but his placement in the MCU.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Definitely a big risk, because not only was he, he wasn't the sexiest name being thrown around for this role, but at the same time, this is your first movie and you're trying to anchor an entire franchise around him. And you can say that the plans that they were having were fluctuating as they were going, but I guess once they cast him, they took that risk, and then they were, Jon Favreau as the director was also a big risk as well. Marvel becoming independent was a big risk. So all of these different things played a role into, what kind of future they were setting themselves up for. And, obviously 10 years later, we can see how that worked out very well. But you can imagine them being in their shoes 10 years ago. They were pretty nervous about how Iron Man was going to do. And if you think about the box office, something that they hadn't repeated since that original run 10 years ago was having multiple MCU movies in the box office top 10 at the same time. So This week you had Infinity War and Black Panther being in the top 5, which is unprecedented for a movie studio. But at the same time, 10 years ago, when The Incredible Hulk came out late in the summer, Iron Man was still number 7. So they had that initial success, and they're able to maintain it to this level 10 years later. But obviously, as we'll talk about a little bit later, the stakes are a lot higher. Now, you're not talking about two movies, starting with close to $100 million. Now, the bar has been raised to $250 million, which is the number that Infinity War just did. We just confirmed that a few hours ago. So that's the new record. So when the Avengers came out, it was a new record. Then 6 years later, Infinity War came out and was a new record. So you can see sort of on the money side how when their universe, as they were building it, what they culminated into. And you can only go up from here as far as I know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's really unprecedented what Marvel's done. I mean, and I'm a huge fan of the movies, but I'll be the first to admit that none of the movies are perfect by any means. Like, they all have glaring flaws, but I think that the most impressive thing about Marvel is the fact that they've consistently been able to pump out content that is absolutely satisfying from a critical perspective for the most part, with a couple of hiccups here and there, and also satisfying in terms of people who are actually fan of the comics, the original inspiration for these stories that we're seeing. And it's pretty crazy how, the cinematic universe model was, I think, kind of a risk. When they first had the inception of it, they had, we're going to take this movie and it's going to branch out into an interweb of many created and interconnected stories. And the fact that they pulled it off rather seamlessly on their first go is pretty substantial. And I think that it's a testament to originality in cinema that if you have an idea for something, you shouldn't be limited by the technology or the the standpoint of the time you're actually making it in. I think you should just jump into it head first. And I like the point you brought up about Jon Favreau. Jon Favreau directing Iron Man, like you said, was a huge risk. But I feel like Kevin Feige, when he took over as executive producer at Marvel, I think he saw something in Jon Favreau's films that they were all kind of more or less iconic. Like, his directing bout was Elf, and even though Elf really has nothing to do in common with Iron Man, with the exception of a funny costume, Elf is iconic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Favreau, to his credit, knows how to make iconic scenes, even in Iron Man 2, which wasn't that great, but it still had some magnificent moments in it that, are... It's pretty unprecedented, what he was able to do on one film and then have that be consistent in quality throughout, the better part of a decade now. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Well, yeah, just to go back on the point of building a cinematic universe, they were really the first studio to do it, not only just in terms of precedent, but in terms of success. They actually did it very well. I mean, obviously, that sort of model has been tried by other studios who just were not that successful at pulling it off. And some of them are still ongoing, like, the Monsters universe with Godzilla and King Kong and all that. That's kind of ongoing. For the most part, they started off pretty well, so we'll see how they end. Obviously, for every success, you have many failures. A lot of would-be franchises based on teen novels and whatnot. Some of them, like the Hunger Games. Obviously, Harry Potter was a big success. Hunger Games, Twilight, those were a lot of financially successful movies. But for every one of those successes, you have many failures. So just to underscore how difficult this endeavor really is. And what Marvel did that's pretty remarkable is they did it without characters who were A-list characters, if you will. So you can imagine their most famous character was the Hulk coming into the universe. Because the Hulk, I would say any casual comic book fan, or even those who are not comic book fans, are aware of who the Hulk is. Because on the Marvel side, you have Spider-Man and his universe, they're pretty popular. You have the X-Men and their universe, they're pretty popular just because of properties that existed in the 90s and 80s, like the cartoons and video games, iconic comic books. But Marvel, as we know it today, just was not there. So to start your universe with Iron Man, who was until now a C-list character, starting it with an actor who's not necessarily was kind of not something you wanted to get close to, and pulling it off 10 years later, seeing the fact that this movie became the number one opening movie of all time is just very remarkable. And the way they went about, on a phase by phase system, you can remember every time they were about to announce a new phase, just how they literally broke the internet every single time. So just seeing the way they were able to get a new generation of fans, were able to satisfy the older generation of friends who grew up reading these comics, and then bringing it all together into like this pop culture juggernaut. Obviously Comic-Con became a phenomenon fairly recently, but then Marvel always dominates Comic-Con. So not only within its genre, you can say that within the hardcore fans within the genre, you can say Marvel occupies a special place there. But then also they were able to become so, they were able to branch out so much and become so mainstream. And, all of those things, you have to really give them credit for pulling it off.
No, for sure. And on to that point, I mean, Iron Man now is like synonymous with like superheroes, but you're right. In the comics, I was a big comic reader back in the day. He was important, but he was nowhere near in the limelight like Fantastic Four and Spider-Man were, and the X-Men were. And it's challenging because other studios did those things. So Marvel Studios, when they started, they were left with characters that weren't necessarily name brand recognition. So, you had the Sam Raimi trilogy of the Spider-Man movies, which, 2 were great. And the last one, we know how that turned out. But Fantastic Four movies, we know that those were train wreck, and X-Men, for the most part, was pretty good.
Daredevil, Elektra.
Oh, God.
Not so good.
Shh. No talking about that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
not talk about them.
But yeah, I mean, there was already a universe that was established, and they had to establish a further, more complicated universe with characters that weren't necessarily name draws, if that makes any sense. Like you said, the Hulk is the most popular one that they started with. I mean, obviously Captain America is iconic, but in terms of sheer popularity and mythology, the Hulk was definitely the most popular. And so the fact that they were able to start this universe with characters that are not necessarily that popular is pretty astounding. And also they create iconic moments in and of themselves. Like, I don't think there's any other actor that can be associated with Tony Stark after RDJ played him. And they made basically a standpoint in cinema on their first try, which is just really commendable. It's pretty impressive.
Absolutely. It's one of those characters who becomes enduring, What it reminded me of is, if you remember The Godfather, the character of his his actual godson, Johnny Fontaine. When he really wanted that movie, he said, this movie, this character was just me. I don't even have to act. And that's kind of how Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah,
is.
for sure.
If you listen to him give interviews and whatnot, he is indistinguishable from Tony Stark. It's unbelievable. It's like he can't turn it off. So all he has to do is engage his own charm, and he's right there. So that makes it, so you have to sort of create your own challenges when it comes to bringing out that character. And that just heightens the level of the performance that he gives, because, you can't just rest on your laurels and just wing it. And, if you do that, yes, your character will be somewhat believable. But then if you take the time and the care to actually apply those extra layers that are present within the script, but not necessarily so obvious that the audience will only see them if you deliver a good performance, he's able to do that as well. So Robert Downey Jr. not only was a perfect actor because of how similar he was to the character in real life, but also I think because he had the care and the charisma and the actual professional carefulness to be able to bring out every single layer of that character, so that 10 years later the audiences still embrace him to the very high level that they did in the first movie.
Yeah, I mean, they made characters fun, and they made them really entertaining to be watched, but they made it have real stakes. And I think this leads nicely into what we're going to talk about first, is just the state of the MCU before Infinity War. And so I feel like Phase 1, introducing all the main heroes, and then, of course, the intersectional movie of the Avengers. I feel like that whole phase was just kind of an elongated proof of concept, because superhero films have worked in the past. I mean, obviously, we talked about Spider-Man, the X-Men, but this cinematic universe interconnected model was not really tried. And I feel like this Phase 1 with Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, and then finally Avengers was proving that there was a market for this kind of interconnected story, and that, it could be a really lucrative thing in pop culture. And so, it's it's really interesting to watch those movies again now, because they're actually in ways a lot more humble than some of the other movies that are out, recently, like Civil War and Age of Ultron, that are kind of like special effects extravaganzas. But the first movies, they definitely they were more restrained. They held back more, I think.
Oh yeah, they were definitely a lot more personal. So
yeah,
obvious, and part of it is how well do the effects really hold up. The effects, I think they do hold up when you look at them compared to today's standard. But for the most part, like you said, they were really pared down, and the focus was more on the characters. And I think part of it was, to what extent can you really sell these characters so that they can actually be relatable to us? So, for example, Tony Stark, genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist. What percentage of your audience is able to relate to all four of those? Not too many, but you could see.
You're the playboy, Abdallah.
Sure, thank you, appreciate it. But yeah, I wish I was a billionaire. So you do relate to the flaws that he has as a person. He's extremely self-centered, but then the way when he realizes to what extent his weapons were actually hurting people, the amount of transformation that he goes through is very profound. And that is something that, maybe aside from Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy, you've never really seen something like that on that level. And so you start with that character. Obviously, Bruce Banner is a lot more easy for people to be, to relate to. You're living with this monster inside of you, something that you cannot control. So you do your best to get rid of it. But then once you cannot, well, what else is left for you but to isolate yourself from the world? So we can relate to that. That's not so difficult. Captain America and Thor were a lot more challenging, because Captain America is first of all, from a time's point of view, he is from an era of America that we've sort of lost touch with, sort of the idealism in the pre-war era. And obviously the movie had to address that, and they did to a very good extent. When Captain America is living in our world, notifying the audience, this is how much we've lost. The Stars and Stripes are old school notion, etc., etc. But then Thor, being a god, obviously there's no way for anybody to relate to something like that.
Exactly.
So what do is you humble him to the lowest level. You basically take away his powers for the entire movie, and he has to realize the value of human sacrifice, something very human, so that he can actually be worthy of getting the hammer back. So when you've engaged all of these characters in such a very personal journey, then obviously the audience buys into it. And so when you bring them together, we do root for them already. You don't have to do any extra work in the Avengers for us to do that. So, obviously when you bring them together, they're going to have issues. They're going to have issues that they need to work out, but you're there with them when they're working it out. And so, the filmmakers are very aware of these things, and they actually layer it into the screenplay and give it the necessary depth that the movies take on an extra meaning when you actually go through them.
Yeah, and something interesting I was thinking about is, like you said, those solo movies really laid the groundwork for the characterization of all of the heroes that we listed, and those had to work in order for the Avengers to work, because if there was even a single misstep, I mean, obviously the Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2 aren't really that well reviewed by critics. Everything else, I mean, Iron Man was definitely the best of the entire Phase 1. But for the most part, like, they were all, very satisfactory. And if those weren't standalone movies that were great by themselves, then there was no chance that, a ensemble movie in which there's not really a lot of characterization that works would be, even feasible to be critically accepted. And so I think that it makes sense to view the Avengers, and I think really the compilation movies as a whole, as, I don't know if I would call them films. I would call them
like events.
Yeah, events. Events is a good word. Events or compilation, or this mixture of just different elements into, like, an experience in cinema. And I feel like, if you go to the Avengers movie not knowing the characters, yeah, you'll have a good time, but you don't really understand the depth and the stakes that are established in the movie unless you're actually buying into all the other cinematic escapades before that. And so when you look at something like Infinity War, which we'll get to in a little bit, but there isn't that much characterization for anyone in particular, with the exception of Thanos, which of course we'll get to. But we as the audience have to be engaged in the characters before we even step foot in an ensemble movie. Otherwise, we're not only going to understand what's going on, but we're not really going to get the gravity of what's going to be actually happening in the plot.
Right. And I do think in relation to Infinity War, the filmmakers were sort of aware at this point they don't really have to do that kind of work anymore. I feel like, obviously you had this stable of 18 or 19 movies.
It was 19,
to lay into who all of these characters were. And so at that point they can just risk doing the movie in media res, meaning, you start when the action has already started. You're not going to do any work to catch anybody up. So why is Thanos attacking? Well, first of all, you have two ships firing at each other in the beginning. If you didn't watch Thor Ragnarok, you would have no idea what was happening on screen. And obviously, and then when you pick up at the aftermath of the attack. So you see all these people already dead. You see, Loki and Thor being in bad shape. And then, you see these villains, these 5 villains. None of them you've actually met before, formally, except for Thanos briefly. And so, you can say the hardcore fans, those who have been paying attention, will know exactly what's going on. But those who are pretty new would feel pretty lost. But, I think they do a good job of catching you up as the story goes along, because as we'll go into in detail, this movie is a very logically constructed movie, and there are no issues that I can think of in terms of the way it's constructed. Everything leads to everything else. There is a connective tissue throughout. There is no jump in continuity. There is no logical misstep right there. So when you can assume they relied upon the fact that their previously built universe was all of the setup that they needed, and this movie just had to execute payoff after payoff after payoff. And so on its own merit, sure, that can lead to some negative reviews, and they were more in for this movie than a lot of the movies in the recent past. And part of the reason was, yes, if you're a newer fan, you're not necessarily going to know what's going on. And some of the key moments that happen in this movie, which the people around you may respond very positively to, you will have no idea. So if this hooded figure shows up in the middle of the movie guarding the Soul Stone, and then we reveal his face, the people around you, once they are excited about recognizing this character and you have no idea who it is, then that's very unfortunate for those people. But then as a filmmaker, I wouldn't necessarily do any work to show who it is. That would just detract from the movie the story I'm trying to tell.
Exactly. And, I think that one of the really impressive things about Infinity War, I mean, we can go back to Phase 2 and the end of Phase 3, of course, but since we're on the topic, I think one of the most impressive things about Infinity War is the fact that it's a 2 hour and 40-minute movie, but it feels like there's no fat on the movie. Like it's
Absolutely.
super lean, and the motivations are there. Like you understand why people are doing things, but ultimately this is a film that the fans wanted and the film that the fans deserved. Like it's the payoff of 19 movies up until this point that have all set up this this boiling pot of different things, and they finally come together. And the fact that they don't catch anybody up to speed is a testament to how lucrative this universe actually is. People are already invested in it. They know all the plot points. They've read all the analysis. They've read all the predictions and stuff. And so all they have to do is just deliver on the promises that have been made continually by the MCU for so many years. And I think that the Russo brothers did a fantastic job with it. A couple issues aside, a couple cringy lines aside, I was really happy with it. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, I don't know, it was kind of somber, honestly, leaving the theater. It was, I mean, of course, the ending was pretty nuts, and unless you know the comics, which I do,
yeah, absolutely.
Did you see my Snapchat?
Well, I feel like
with that girl who was literally sobbing next to me. Did you see that?
I did not. I'll have to take a look.
Like literally, like it's just my face, like completely straight faced, and like I'm just like looking at her, and she's like, oh my god. I'm like, girl, like I hate to be so meta with it, but read the Wikipedia page. Like they have sequels. Like no, like come on. Like the only person that stays dead in comic books is Barbara Gordon in Batman.
And Uncle Ben. Don't forget about Uncle Ben.
Uncle Ben, yeah, but he
dies many times, but he stays there when he's dead.
Yeah, I mean he comes pre-murdered in Spider-Man: Homecoming, but
yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that is true. Nobody really stays dead. Loki came back many times, but actually, part of it was Thanos was pretty meta about it too. He was like, "Yeah, no resurrections this time." So
yeah.
Yeah, Loki, we thought he died at the end of the first Thor movie. He came back, and we thought he died before. I think at the
Thor
end of
Thor 2, he died, yeah.
He came back. And he's like, "Yeah, no resurrections this time. I'll make sure you're dead." Because if you don't have a body, then you don't know if somebody's dead or not.
Yeah.
So yeah, now we can go ahead and recap the MCU in the context of what this movie had to accomplish. Infinity War, its job, like you said, was to start wrapping up the story that they started setting up since Phase 1. And part of it is the Phase 1 story that they tried to set up was the characterizations. You introduced what we call the original Avengers. Tony Stark, Captain America, Thor, the Hulk, Black Widow, and then Hawkeye, which we haven't seen in this movie, but presumably he's coming back for the next one. So you have those people, you've set up their entire character arcs and see where they begin, where they basically have to end. Tony Stark, like we said, extremely narcissistic and self-centered billionaire who learns about the evil that his weapons are creating, makes a very profound realization, and then dedicates his life towards justice, righting his wrongs. Becomes the Iron Man. The first act that he does actually is to stop terrorism. So that's pretty profound in its own.
Yeah.
The other character who does the exact same thing is Black Panther. So when T'Challa becomes, when his father dies and he becomes king, his first act is, besides stopping Zemo, obviously, was to go into Nigeria and basically get rid of these terrorists who were kidnapping women. And so you have that sort of noble deed that a superhero, that noble responsibility of a source for a superhero. Spider-Man does the same thing, but he operates on a much smaller level than these global Avengers, right? So you have that Tony Stark. He's very bent into righting all of his wrongs, getting rid of violence in the world, but doesn't really go about it in the most positive way. So, being who he is, being burdened with knowledge, the way that Thanos puts it, what happens to him? He creates this Ultron program, which he believes is going to protect the world. Obviously ends up backfiring on him because doesn't have the wherewithal to check his impulses and, realize that it's a bad idea to combine, the knowledge of the scepter, in this case, the mind gem, which he didn't really understand with the program that he wrote, and Jarvis, with the program that he wrote, to create Ultron. He didn't really understand what he was doing. He did it anyway, saw what happens, and predicted the future. He would be the one responsible for the Avengers' death. So it was sort of a natural evolution of his character. And then, by the time Infinity War rolls around, he's still on the same sort of trajectory, trying to save the world. And that's going to become very important in terms of how it will pay off, I believe, in the fourth movie, which we'll get into as one of our last points.
Yeah.
And you have Captain America, Steve Rogers, very idealistic man from the 1940s, very eager to enter the war effort. And when he does, in Winter Soldier, after the war is over, and he wakes up into this current time where everything that he's known has been lost, and he realizes that all of the sacrifices he made were in vain because he never defeated Hydra. Hydra actually became stronger after his death. So that was pretty significant for him. And so the only way for him to push back against what he's viewing as, the increased militarization of the world. Obviously, when it comes to Avengers, when he found out that the SHIELD was creating nuclear weapons, he took it very personally because, these are things that he's completely against. And then obviously when the Sokovia Accords come into play, and that's not something he would ever consider signing up for, You do not want to take away people's freedoms, which is what the Insight program did during Winter Soldier, which is what the Accords were going to do during Civil War. So he's against all of that. Obviously, at the end of that movie, the Avengers had to break up because it was an ideological break, as well as a personal break with Tony Stark. And so by the time this movie starts, he had to be operating on his own, rectifying the wrongs of the world, but doing it on his own terms, as opposed to being sort of a soldier employed by a potentially malevolent, government force. So you have, those are the two main characters of the franchise going through their own sort of character arcs that you had to resolve in this movie and the next one. And then, the Hulk and Thor have their own issues as well. The Hulk, things are not really going well for him because it's a relationship between performance issues, but it goes deeper than that because it's a dichotomy between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. In Ragnarok we found out that the Hulk never let Bruce Banner exist for at least 2 years. Then Bruce Banner comes back, he has issues getting the Hulk to come out. And then in this movie, the Hulk actually refuses to come out, and he makes a line saying, we need to resolve these issues. We have a lot to discuss. And then finally, Thor, who's the most tragic of them all, he's basically lost his entire family. He lost his mom in Thor 2, his father and his sister and his planet in Ragnarok. And then on top of all that, in the beginning of this movie, he loses half of the population of Asgard. He loses his brother. So you've taken everything away from him, as he says in the movie. Doesn't really have much to live for anymore. So he's got all these feelings of revenge and stuff like that. It has become personal for him. And you put him in a direct line of fire against Thanos.
Yeah, I think that I think Thor was I don't want to say I was apprehensive about Thor going to the movie, but I was definitely the most intrigued as what they're going to do with the character because, you know, as you were alluding to, you know, Thor has been this kind of someone who's not really down to earth, and obviously I mean that in the literal sense because he's essentially a god or an alien or, you know, what have you. He's someone who hasn't really related to humanity at all, with the exception of a really cringy romance with Jane Foster. But you haven't really seen him be vulnerable as opposed to, you know, some of the other characters. Like, you know, Tony Stark had literally his life you know, in someone else's hands. He had a shrapnel blown up inside of him, and so basically he was faced with his own humanity. And the same thing goes for, you know, Bruce Banner is obviously very human, and same thing with Captain America, who has basically lost everyone he's ever loved. And
absolutely.
And so with Thor, he's a guy who has not really been that relatable as a character. I mean, and you know, in the first two movies, he's been this like this statured voice man with the beautiful beard and the hammer, and I will be the symbol of hope and stuff. And in Ragnarok, they deconstructed his character very, very well, and they did it.
Yes.
And they did it in the spirit of an indie kind of quirky comedy, which I thought worked really well. But when you have all those elements that are kind of conflicting in the character, and you know, and by the end of Ragnarok, all of Asgard and basically everything he's ever loved is basically destroyed. His father's dead. His home is completely, you know, shattered. A relative that he never knew he even had is dead. And they really show him in those scenes of the Rocket Raccoon and Groot, like he finally lets his hair down, so to speak, and he actually admits that, you know, he is susceptible to, you know, these feelings of grief and apprehension like everyone else is. And that was a interesting character arc, and I'm glad that they actually had those scenes with, you know, two of the most ridiculous characters in Marvel, Groot and Rocket Raccoon, with one of the ones that's seen as kind of more stiff, for lack of a better term. And it worked out really well because you actually feel for him, and like you're like, oh man, like this guy who we think is invincible and can fly and is, you know, 2,000 years old, like he really has a soul. Like he feels the weight of the world in his shoulders, and like you said, he really has nothing to lose. So I think besides Thanos, I think Thor was probably the most satisfying character in the movie, even though he didn't have that much screen time. But the culmination,
absolutely,
yeah, and the culmination of his story was handled very well, I think.
Yeah, he goes through an entire act within this movie, but also is a continuation of his arc since we've met him. And so part of it is not only emotionally the journey he goes through. You know, obviously, like I said, he was this very cocky guy. He thought everything was given to him. He's a god. The guardian of Earth is his birthright and all that. Then he realizes once you take everything away from him, that is something he actually has to earn, that is not given to him. And he does earn it towards the end because he becomes worthy of his hammer. And, you know, then doesn't really do much with that responsibility in Thor 2, except, you know.
Yeah, like Thor 2 is really the only cinematic misstep, I think, for the universe.
Yeah,
like,
it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thor, you know, you have to give him credit. Thor is not a very easy character to adapt. He's not, and, you know, he went through like 4 different directors many different directors in over the course of his 6 or 7 movies he's done. So
yeah, it was Kenneth Branagh for the first one. I forget who did. Let me pull it up. Alan Taylor. I don't even know what the hell he's done.
Alan Taylor. I think he was supposed to be the director of Wonder Woman. Was supposed to do the second one, and then she left the project for creative differences. And then Alan Taylor came in. I don't know how much time he had to fix the movie, but the movie turned out the way it did. And, you know, because of all of that and the Avengers, Chris Hemsworth himself was getting tired of playing the character. He was saying, you know, the challenge was sort of gone, and the character really needed some type of redesign and recharacterization before he became interesting again, which is what Taika Waititi did.
Job. Yeah.
And so having established that character, but then basically having him lose everything, it was easy for the Russo brothers to pick up where they left off, where Taika left off. Obviously this movie, because of everything that goes on, could not be as funny as Thor Ragnarok was, but you still have them. They still were able to pull off some of those comic moments with Thor. But obviously, you put him together with the Guardians of the Galaxy, you're sort of gonna get that sort of comic vibe to it.
For sure. Yeah. And so, all right, so we've gone through the main heroes. Why don't we move more into phase 2 and see and like talk about some of the character like payoffs that are in there. I think going just in sequential order, I have the list pulled up right here. So Iron Man 3 was the first movie in phase 2, and in that movie we see kind of the embellishment of Tony Stark kind of coming to grips with his own humanity, and it's a commentary on PTSD and accepting your limitations even if you think you're all that in a bag of chips. And you get the weight of what's actually happened to these characters, I feel like, more effectively in Iron Man than anything else. And you actually see it in a explicit sense when he has panic attacks left and right, and he's still dealing with the fact that he had that massive attack from the Chitauri that happened in New York. And even though there's some tonal problems with Iron Man 3, I thought that it was pretty good. And I wouldn't say it added too much to his character, with the exception of him making the choice to destroy all the suits, but then the next movie he gets all the suits back, so it was kind of inconsequential in that aspect. But
but they did deal with it. They dealt with it in Civil War. Yeah.
Like,
so
and then it never stopped because I don't want to stop. And
because he was ruining his personal relationship. Because you made a promise. Hey, you're gonna leave. Pepper Potts was this. She's kind of a plot device at this point, but what she serves is the character to basically humble Iron Man, bring him back to our level, bring him back to Earth, and they do touch on it in this movie as, he has these dreams about settling down as a parent, raising kids. That would be the end of Iron Man. That would mean, he's contemplating his own retirement, if you will, from the superhero genre. So, Pepper Potts is this sort of character who reminds him about the human side of all things. You don't have to be Iron Man full time. You do have this alter ego who has his own responsibilities as well. And again, that's something that characters like Spider-Man and Batman pull off very well. The dichotomy between the two sides, your superhero versus the civilian. And Tony Stark is that guy in the MCU, and Iron Man 3 deconstructed him pretty well before building back to, basically you have these godly, never before seen, unprecedented events that you become aware of aliens, for the first time. You have, you're contemplating your place within the universe. You're questioning everything. And, when you go through all that, you do have to take the time to really process what's going on. And I think Iron Man 3 really did that.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Going back to basics, the villain in Iron Man 3, or at least the presumed villain, was this terrorist type of person who, again, that's the first types of antagonists that Iron Man dealt with in the first movie. He dealt with terrorists. So you're bringing it back to basics in that regard as well.
Yeah, and I feel like going on the subject of the character of the Mandarin in Iron Man 3, I feel like Phase 2 is when Marvel started taking more risks, and they started, executing things that maybe were not in the spirit of all the comics, but they took creative risks. And so I think clear example of that in just a couple movies here. I mean, Iron Man 3, the Mandarin, people got bad out of shape over it because the Mandarin wasn't, the sorcerer supreme-esque guy in the comics, all like the magic rings and stuff. And I don't know. I personally really liked the fact that the Mandarin was an actor and the real Mandarin was Guy Pearce in the movie. I thought that was a pretty clever reversal, and I feel like that theme of reversals is pretty fleshed out within all of Phase 2. Another example of that would be Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Captain America: The Winter Soldier is a political thriller and an espionage movie at its core, and so you're taking this guy who's been this huge ideologue, Captain America, and he basically is at odds with his own personal beliefs about, you know, the role of government and the role of patriotism, and then he sees the organization he's been working for years crumble in front of him because of corruption. And, you know, and for something that's a little more lighthearted, we have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is, you know, a love letter to 80s rock and like silly sci-fi movies like Flash Gordon.
Right.
Yeah. Like
space opera.
Yeah. Ant-Man is a heist movie when it really comes down to it. And so I feel like Phase 2 was when the studio itself knew, okay, there's a market for these movies, so what can we do to really change it up and keep people interested? And I feel like if they had just made, you know, Phase 1 2.0 with just these like grand heroic people with the same character motivations all the way through, then I really don't think it would have been as effective. And having those movies that are either character reversals or tone reversals like Guardians of the Galaxy, I feel like those are essential for, you know, what we've seen up until this point. It's really kind of shaped the rest of the MCU, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those things where, at least, you know, when Marvel was really coming, it was just rounding into form at that point. I do agree. Part of it is hiring the right directors, not only just getting the right actors, but the right directors.
Did you see that, by the way? I tried to take a sip of my water. My cap is still on it, so I just, like, sucked on the cap of my water.
Yeah, you're so invigorated by this conversation, you don't know what you're doing.
I'm just too hot, man. Too strong. But you were saying about directors.
These bars at you. Getting the right directors and letting them play with their voices. And, you know, Iron Man 3 was a Shane Black movie. Ant-Man was an Edgar Wright movie, even though he didn't end up directing the final cut of it.
I was so disappointed by that, because Edgar Wright would have probably made an incredible Ant-Man movie. Like, Ant-Man's
absolutely
good, but I mean,
I think the spirit still remained.
Oh, the DNA is still there for sure.
Yeah, the DNA is still there, and you know, you have these sort of things, and when they realize that, hey, like you said, we don't have to make these cookie cutter, you know, movies with formulaic. Well, let's take actual genres and give them a superhero twist. Let's take the spy genre, the espionage and political thriller genre, give it a superhero twist. Let's take a heist movie, give it a superhero twist. And you're getting these sort of movies, you know, and that's just them taking risks, seeing them validated through critical responses, audience responses, and being able to be very confident about the types of stories that they can tell and be able to actually take risk into the future.
Absolutely. Building
it bigger and bigger, but still knowing that you're anchoring these movies in strong characters.
Yeah, and I feel like a testament to that is, you know, like we were just talking about, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is a character study when it really comes down to it. It's like you see...
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, they get more fleshed out in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but in Volume 1, even though it's a really, like, fun-loving movie and it's, like, silly and it has hilarious jokes, which, I mean, it's an all-out comedy when you really think about it. Like, it's a freaking hilarious movie. But by the end of it, you realize that all these characters are really tragic. I mean, even the ones you don't know much about. I mean, there's one line about Rocket Raccoon's past. You know, I didn't ask
when he was drunk. Yeah,
I didn't ask to get made. I'm a monster. I'm a monstrosity. And so by the end of the movie, like, even though that there's this fun-loving and kind of nonchalant aesthetic around the movie, it really shows that, like, they can take those characters and they can make them relatable and fleshed out and meaty, and, you know, within the genre of that kind of space opera that you were just talking about. It's very, very. It's pretty impressive that they were able to have characters that were, you know, had some real weight to them, even if everything that preceded them was just, you know, screwball comedy-esque.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's just a testament to, again, hire the right director, let him play with the source material, and you know, and there is no studio interference in that sense. You know, obviously. Because Guardians of the Galaxy, the reason why it was able to work was you're not tied to. Obviously, you have a brand new set of characters who don't have any sort of precedental baggage with regards to the universe you've already built. So you can let them do their own thing. Now, I would say Guardians of the Galaxy, even though it was not the first movie, even though it was not the first movie that introduced the idea of these Infinity Stones, it was the first one that really embraced it. You know, you knew what you were dealing with. You knew the backstory of the Infinity Stones, and that was sort of the linchpin for the payoff that they had set up 2 years ago with the end of the Avengers. So, it had that going on, but you saved that basically towards the until the end. So, but you have an entire movie to build up these characters, build up their dynamics of a team, and by the very act of them coming together, you've basically deconstructed them and put together a very solid team that would, go into the future. And that was sort of the one project that Marvel, they were feeling themselves, and they were like, okay, well, if you can pull this off, then we can't say anything to you. And at that point, there's nothing that would be off limits. Because if the Guardians of the Galaxy didn't work, you wouldn't imagine that maybe Ant-Man would get made. You wouldn't imagine that maybe Doctor Strange would get made, because these are movies that are just way too out there.
Yeah.
And so having pulled this one successfully off, then you can actually even take more risks. Civil War and Infinity War would probably not have happened, at least not to the scale that they did.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings it full circle. I mean, like the last two movies on our list are, Avengers: Age of Ultron, which is fine. It's like, it delivers upon some payoffs that are in the the lore that's been presented. But I mean, it's fine. But it's not really a risk. I wouldn't call Age of Ultron a risk. I mean, it's kind of just melting together all of these plot points that didn't work so well, but it was still really enjoyable. And then Ant-Man, I feel like you said, it's a risk. It's a they cast a person who's in Judd Apatow dick joke comedies, like, for the lead in a superhero movie. And like, you would think that's crazy. Like, same thing with like Rocket Raccoon, like a talking raccoon voiced by Bradley Cooper, Vin Diesel voicing a talking tree, and then Chris Pratt, who used to be a fat guy before like Guardians of the Galaxy. It's like, those things could not have worked if they didn't establish that base lore that they had in phase 1. And like we said, phase 2, they took a bunch of risks, and I feel like they delivered upon them pretty well.
Drax is a wrestler turned actor.
Yeah, Dave Bautista.
You have Gamora. Zoe Saldana was probably the most well-known person in that cast, and you put her in complete makeup, make her unrecognizable. So everything was pointing towards that was going to be a flop, and obviously it was not. People loved it. Nobody knew who they were beforehand. That's a nice thing. And now they're household names and synonymous with with just success and being able to put off all these risks that you're taking.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So, and then with that, let's quickly go through phase 3, and then we'll talk about Infinity War. So
phase 3, you're feeling yourself. You've gone through all these waves of success. You've pulled off successfully, relatively speaking, 2 major team-up events. So now, what is the risk you're going to take? You can introduce more characters because you can do it. You can start building world building. You've already gone into space with Guardians of the Galaxy. So what else can you go? You can, you can go the magical route with Doctor Strange. You can introduce. Well, we can just go through it in order. It's probably going to be easier.
Yeah. So the first movie in phase 3 is Captain America: Civil War, which, taking the aesthetic from Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which the Russo brothers also directed. I mean, I'll go out and say it. I think that Civil War is the best superhero movie that I've probably ever seen, besides like Spider-Man 2, like the Raimi movies. I think Civil War is probably my favorite Marvel movie, like, in this universe. Like, it's not only was it a payoff in terms of like having all these characters on screen, but it motivated an internal conflict that we've seen teased, and I thought it was a really, really well done reversal. Problems aside, with Captain America and Iron Man. I mean, like think about it. Iron Man 2, like, for example, like, he gives the biggest middle finger and fuck you to the government, and then in this movie he sides with the government. And then Captain America, who is literally a symbol of patriotism and the United States government, is basically a rogue agent in that movie. And so having that internal moral conflict present itself on screen as a superhero, special effects extravaganza, I thought that was, absolutely stunning. Like, I really have no problems with Captain America: Civil War that are like anything that are detracting from the movie. And
Yeah, neither do I.
say again.
Yeah, neither do I. I thought it was a fairly perfect movie, perfectly executed in terms of what it was supposed to accomplish. Part of it was it had to achieve a balance between getting the audience to side with Iron Man versus Captain America, and the only way you're able to pull that off is if you had already characterized them across your first two phases in such a way that the decisions that they make in this movie make sense to their characters, which it does, and then because of the audience's sort of personal stakes within the conflict, you don't necessarily pick a side. You're always going to be torn between the two sides. And then the nice touch was making it personal at the end, because you had to have the conflict between Tony Stark and Captain America, and it had to be personal. And I think they pulled that off very well. It wasn't just a plot-driven movie; entirely it was character-driven.
Yeah.
Even though it was a very big story, it was entirely character-driven. So that was a nice touch about it. The only sort of plot thing that happens is Zemo. Zemo's involvement was the only sort of, but again, Zemo was a motivated character, so you can say he did what he did because of his personal vendetta against the Avengers because of what happened to his family during the war in Sokovia.
Yeah.
But then the sort of events that he puts into motion, they're the ones that lead eventually to first of all Black Panther's involvement, but then the actual, hey, Winter Soldier may be a fugitive of the state, we need to bring him in. Of course, Captain America is not going to allow that. Of course, Tony Stark is going to take a lead into incarcerating him. Therefore, it had to be a personal conflict between the two. And then we find out that Winter Soldier actually killed Tony Stark's parents. And the response that he has, given what we had established in the movie, that he's, even 25 years later, he's still trying to work through the trauma that caused him. Because we know he has daddy issues. But, he constructed this device to basically remember that day he last saw them. So he's working through that.
Yeah,
then you find out this guy that you're trying to incarcerate actually killed your dad. Of course, you're going to try to kill him. So all of these things make sense on a personal level. And so those are the kind of things that we obviously we see more of that in Infinity War. But those are the kind of things that takes years to build up, but then you pay it off in a very satisfying way.
Yeah. I think payoff's the main word of that movie. I think it's, absolutely fantastic. It provides, a good standpoint for, the CGI fest and the action scenes and the explosions that you want from a superhero movie, but it makes them have motivations that are down to earth and actually relatable. Like, not only to people who actually watch the movie, but the characters. I mean, like I said, Iron Man 2, like, you see Tony Stark have a complete disregardment of the government, gives him the middle finger, like in the second scene of the movie. But in this one, like, he set out to stop hurting people unintentionally in the first and second Iron Mans. Like, that's why he stopped his weapons division in this company. And then in that scene when the State Department lady is saying, like, you killed my son, like, you think you help people, but, you fight for yourself. And so Tony realizes that, having, this absolute dominion over the world that he originally made to ameliorate this problem of, like, innocent death is actually causing more innocent death than he really even he anticipated. So in that sense, I think it's a really fascinating culmination of all these character elements. So I think moving to the next one, Doctor Strange, like we talked about, like phase 2 and 3 is like when Marvel was taking risks and things that, like, maybe would not have worked. With the exception of a couple script things with and pacing things with Doctor Strange, I thought it was very good. It was one of my favorites, 2016. Yeah, for entertainment purposes. And it was like, not only the risk of having this world where it's really weird and it bends the rules of time and space and physics, but I mean, just the logistical information. Scott Derrickson, the guy who directed it, was a horror director. I mean, he makes a couple horror movies that I liked. I mean, he made Sinister, I think. What else did he make? He made a couple bullshit, like The Exorcism of Emily Rose, and like really crappy popcorn horror movies and stuff. But interesting choice to have a horror movie director, direct something like that. And even though there isn't many horrifying aspects of it, with the exception of that really creepy hand scene when he's like tripping on whatever LSD
right, sure, yeah,
like the the weird body dysmorphia stuff. yeah, I really and Doctor Strange was a risk, and I feel like it really paid off because it opened up this, instead of making the continuity of the world completely muddled, it actually opened up new avenues for them to explore, like in terms of characterization and just overall aesthetic for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I really give credit for Scott Derrickson was, to go on to this world of payoff as well. I feel like, again, the way that the movie climaxes, everything that goes in there was set up earlier in the movie. So we only spent one scene with the time stone before it was unleashed in full in the climax. And, we saw it being able to reverse and move time forward with the apple being eaten versus regenerating. But then what follows is just a couple of lines from Mordo saying, something like, if you don't use this carefully, you can create time loops and everything
Spatial
like
paradoxes, time loops, like branches in time.
So it seemed like something that was just thrown away, but then it becomes the entire point of the third act, and he was using it to his advantage. And so basically everything that happens, in that CGI extravaganza, which, to be honest, is probably some of the most spectacular work I've seen in superhero movies and movies in general.
The effects in Doctor Strange are... Every action scene in that movie is absolutely incredible. Like it's worth seeing this in the movie just for that. Like it's just absolutely mind blowing.
It's just a combination of very good ideas. You know, the scene where he's fighting in the astral plane against this person in the hospital, the scene where he's reversing time as things are going forward, and then obviously the time loop scene. And it's an unconventional ending. You expect some big fist fight.
Big beam in the sky.
Exactly. But then in this case, you kind of have a adversary you cannot defeat, so you have to outsmart him, and so that's what he does. You bring time into a timeless realm to imprison this unstoppable force and convince him to leave the earth alone. And you win that way, but it's not a conventional win. So that's a risk that they took on their own, but it's something they completely earned. And just another example of Marvel being able to run into form, being able to take that big risk and, having it pay off. But then, hiring Benedict Cumberbatch, somebody who's well established outside of this genre, and basically having him play ball, with your universe, Some of these actors are very serious actors, Chiwetel Ejiofor, a serious actor. The woman who plays
Tilda Swinton.
Tilda Swinton, obviously she's an multiple Oscar winner, perhaps. These are serious people that you're getting to play these, characters where they're moving their hands around all weird, and they sell it. So I really respect that sort of capacity. It's not just any sort of project that can get you to play ball like that.
No, for sure. I mean, and like you said, I mean, this is probably a very challenging film for them to pull off without making it really, really silly. Like, it's an inherently ridiculous world, but you have A-list people like Benedict Cumberbatch is, probably one of the most respected actors at the time, and same thing with Tilda Swinton and Chiwetel.
Oh man.
Yeah. No.
Well, the thing is also
Chiwetel, I know how to pronounce his name, but I just making a meme of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because these are likable people too, so you're making them unlikable. Like Benedict Cumberbatch, when Sherlock came out, he was the internet's boyfriend, if you will. That's a term. That's a thing. To make him unlikable in the beginning of that movie was kind of a risk, and they pulled it off.
Yeah, so, and he was supposed to be like an arrogant, lovable Tony Starkish asshole, but I mean, Doctor Strange is just, when you think about it, he's really just an asshole. He's really like a complete asshole. Like when he screams at like Rachel McAdams, and literally just like gives her ass on a silver platter and just like basically fucks up her ego like for life. I watched the scene. I'm like, this is a superhero movie, Jesus.
Yeah, that was pretty sinister, right? Yeah. So, doing that, having the wherewithal to say, hey, we're going to hire this guy that everybody loves. We're going to make you hate him for the beginning of the movie, and then we're going to turn it around. That's kind of a risk, and he paid off.
But even in that sense, I mean, towards the end of the movie, you can still see he retains a little bit of arrogance and stuff. Like he's not completely likable by the end of the film, I would argue.
Yeah.
And
but then you sort of recognize that that's part of his character.
Oh,
He
for
needs
sure.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and you know, that theme of self-betterment that's in the movie, you know, that's the reason why he was, you know, able to get a PhD and an MD at the exact same time is not because of his photographic memory and genius level intellect. It's because he has a burning desire to learn all he can to get better at whatever he wants to accomplish. And that's why he's such a good sorcerer. Like he has that drive in him that manifests as arrogance, but when it comes down to it, he really just wants to better himself. And that's why he's able to do all these crazy things. And I feel like Doctor Strange as a character, I think is going to be one of the more fascinating ones that's going to be in the MCU because he brings like a level of rationality to a world that is completely irrational, like magic. Like it's pretty cool. I mean, in the films actually, or in the comics rather, Doctor Strange is like almost like a Merlin kind of character for people like Spider-Man. Like when Spider-Man has to talk to somebody, it's not Tony Stark he goes to in the comics. It's Doctor Strange. Like Doctor Strange is the one who gives him kind of dominion and guidance over New York City. So it's interesting to see him kind of segue into a kind of a not a caretaker role, I wouldn't say that, but more of an overseer, I'd say. Like in
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that kind of leads, speaking of Spider-Man, that leads into Spider-Man Homecoming, which is an all-out comedy. Like it's a John Hughes inspired, you know, coming of age film that, you know, Spider-Man in the new manifestation. Obviously, there's that whole debacle with Sony Studios and Marvel and all the rights retaining stuff over that. You know, they had the plot point of, you know, Spider-Man's not in the earlier manifestations of the universe, even though he's probably the most famous Marvel character, I'd argue. And they used it, like, you know, to their advantage. Like they had the fact that he was like staying under wraps and staying in New York City as a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to their advantage in something like Civil War. And then when he's in his own movie, like he's not this conflicted guy with a mopey, you know, moon face like Tobey Maguire was. He's a kid. Like he's a 15-year-old kid who is fumbling around and screwing up, and he desperately wants everyone to see him as this kind of, you know, this beacon of hope that he felt like he was in Civil War. And, you know, they deliver upon his character very, very well. They make him an instantly relatable and, you know, in many ways kind of an audience-like character where, like, they're learning about this entire world for the first time, even though they're actually ingrained in the world. And it's interesting to see, like, you know, in Civil War and also in Spider-Man Homecoming, you understand that in this world that's presented, being a superhero is not that big of a deal. Like, it's like in this world, like, you know, superheroes make the news all the time. And so to see somebody at a very small level, you know, do the best that he can for his community, I thought was, you know, I thought that was a perfect setting for something like Spider-Man, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, like you said, he's somebody is easy to relate to, you know. If you are that age and you find out you have powers, but then you know that the Avengers exist, obviously you're going to be very eager to sort of work your way onto that team because it's going to be something very cool for you, but also a way for you to do what you are setting yourself up to do, which is, you know, protecting your community. But then being able to, you know, Tony Stark obviously has to reel him in and say, hey, focus on school. You're still in high school. So just work on being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. And they do take the time to show that. You know, they show him like helping a old lady, like
the churro.
Yeah, somebody like stole a bike and he got it back. You know, things like that before he can really be involved into something bigger. But then, like you said, it's a coming of age movie, so he's taking on this challenge for himself, and then he's able to pull it off. And so proving to himself and proving to Tony Stark that he can handle these responsibilities was the point of this movie.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you do that with a very, very effective villain, somebody who's very well written, but also has a personal connection to Peter Parker. And that's very important because obviously at the end he doesn't die. So, you know, you can still pay that off in the future. But, you know, Spider-Man has been able to inspire him, this person who was his antagonist to begin with, but now is somebody who has gained an immense amount of respect for Spider-Man. He's going to actually do his job to protect him. So Spider-Man as an inspiration is something that he actually ends that movie with.
Yeah, for sure. What Wait, hold on. Sorry, my audio cut out for 1 sec. Yeah, sorry to cast off your point as saying for sure, but I couldn't hear your last couple points, but because the audio was cutting out. Yeah, I'll go back and like.
Don't worry, it was a very salient and good point, obviously.
Yeah, you were taking inspiration from me because I'm just making good point after good point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I learned from the best.
For those of you listening, Abdallah and I are pretty self-deprecating towards each other. So, all right. So we'll get to the last two, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll talk about Infinity War. So, next one I think is one of probably the best risks that Marvel could have taken is Thor Ragnarok. I think Thor Ragnarok is it's a triumph on a lot of levels. I mean, some people just see it as a Marvel movie that's very tongue-in-cheeky kind of humor, and it's grandiose and has a beautiful color palette. But to me, it represents the fact that it's kind of a return to form for this character of Thor in a lot of cases. Like, in the comics, he's this inherently ridiculous guy. He's a Norse god. Like, he doesn't really have a place anywhere on Earth, and he's portrayed as just like, this moral ideologue and kind of an arrogant asshole, like in the first movie. In the second one, he becomes just basically like a knight in shining armor for Jane Foster. But, in Thor Ragnarok, they, like in Guardians of the Galaxy, they deconstructed his character. And they made it work at a level that I never thought would even, work. Like, they had something where, Thor pokes fun at himself, which I would never thought he would do. Like, he throws a ball at a window and it hits him right in the face when he's trying to have a heroic moment. And some of those moments didn't work, obviously. But, Thor Ragnarok was probably my favorite movie in terms of, like, big budget blockbusters of 2017, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely. And Thor Ragnarok was one of those movies. It was kind of a reset button.
Yeah, exactly.
The closest to the MCU coming towards retconning. You're sort of kind of retconning the character of Thor. Obviously, every experience he's gone through still matters, but then the way he views them is a little different because you have to reimagine the character a little bit. Not only do you reset him, you kind of reset the Hulk. And obviously, but you don't reset him in a way that feels jarring. Everything seems organic. Obviously the Hulk has been the Hulk for the last 2 years. So because of that, he's going to be able to learn how to talk a little bit more. He's going to be more relatable as a character, as a Hulk, somebody you can actually control, and, somebody who has a wider range of emotion than just pure rage.
Yeah. So
the Hulk is a funny character. He laughs, he makes jokes. He's a little silly sometimes, and those are good things. And obviously, even though this sort of comes off as a joke, it's a little bit more profound. The way they start planting the seeds for the relationship between Bruce Banner and the Hulk. When Bruce Banner manifests himself, he's like, I haven't been present in like 2 years, but now I'm here, and you don't care. So like that was funny at the time, but it actually means a lot. So
no, for sure.
Definitely the first act in a 3-part act between this movie, Infinity War, and then Avengers 4. I think they're gonna pay off whatever is happening there at some point in that movie. They're gonna take the time to do that. So you reset those two, but then you also reset Loki. Loki is probably one of the most dynamic characters in the entire universe, but in the sense that not only does he change a lot, but he sort of changes in a cyclical way, but you sort of understand why. He's the god of mischief. He's not really supposed to fit into any one box. You can't lump him as, this is who he is, this is who he is, this is who he is. He's going to change a whole lot. But in this movie, you sort of see the wide range of everything that he can be. And in the end, he becomes this sort of a noble character who actually will work to save his people. And, we saw that in the final battle, he did his best to actually evacuate Asgard as Hela was basically trying to destroy it. He's the one who goes and, gets Surtur to destroy it. And at the same time, he takes the Tesseract. So there is a little bit of that mischief still in him, but he has noble intentions at that point. And
yeah,
And the way he interacts with Thor in this movie actually gets him to that point. So you can see how much he grew as a character in that movie. And obviously, the deconstruction of Thor, he loses his hammer. At that point, it's back to the first movie type of thing. But now he realizes just how, he basically unlocks the God mode. He knows he's the God of thunder. At the end, you can see how powerful he is. But even with that sort of level up, he's still not able to destroy Hela. But then realizing that Asgard is a people, not a place, you're willing to risk your planet to save your people. So making that sacrifice again, that makes him worthy of wielding some type of hammer. Yeah, and obviously that doesn't pay off until the next movie, but it's there. The seeds are planted.
Yeah, and that's a great point too, man. Like, when you really think about it, Hela and Circe, that's his name, the fire guy.
Surtur.
Surtur. They kind of win. Like they Asgardians are now exiled to wherever world's going to take them at the end of Thor Ragnarok, and in a way that they kind of win, and that's kind of one of the first superhero movies to actually do that, where the malevolent goal is actually accomplished at the end of the movie. Usually it's a reversal where the guy's monologuing and then the superhero stops him and then everything's hunky dory. But at the end of the movie, it's surprisingly bleak. I think that it's everything that precedes it is an indie screwball comedy like from Taika Waititi, who did Hunt for the Wilder People, which I thought was really good, by the way. But yeah, it's a reversal on pretty much every account in that movie, and I think that's why it works so well. And it's even more impressive the fact that I think it was 60% of the movie was improvisation, which is which is that just shows that they picked the right director and the right producer and the right screenwriter, because to have a movie that has so much money in it, and not only so much money, but there are so many plot points that are serving as linchpins for the actual motivations of the movie, and to have that be improvised and have it still work, that's very impressive.
Yeah,
it's pretty awesome.
You also had a lot of characters you needed to introduce.
Korg. Speaking of that,
Korg, Meek,
favorite character 2017 by far.
Oh yeah.
Hey man, I'm gonna get out of here. Want to come? Hello, Doug.
It only takes a crazy mind to come up with something like that, because that's not who Korg is in the comics, but you reinvent him in a way that makes sense.
As a New Zealand club bouncer, right? That's what I
exactly. That is exactly what he was going for.
Hey, he's Mick. Oh, Mick's dead. Hey, Mick, you're alive. Hey, Mick. Hey, man, all right?
Oh, that's actually pretty good.
Hey, man, we're gonna get the spaceship and get out of here. Want to come?
All right. So we've gone on about that. Last movie, Black Panther, which speaks for itself. There are some issues with it that we've talked about that I had with the movie, of course, but I thought it was a very good movie. And
excellent character portrayal,
for sure, and
on both sides,
for sure, yeah, and
protagonist and the antagonist.
Yeah, and even if I wanted some more, character away from the Killmonger, there was enough there to make him an actual sympathetic villain, as opposed to, there's one thing about understanding a villain. There's nothing about sympathizing and feeling for the villain. And I feel like that it casts those kind of two shadows very, very well, where you actually understand what he's trying to do, but then you actually understand why he's trying to do it, and you actually understand why he believes that he's right. And that's a key to a villain that we haven't really seen. Even the best villains, like Loki is one of the best villains in the MCU, and even we don't really understand why he's such a bastard, but besides in the fact that he's the god of mischief. But with someone like Killmonger, you understand that he feels disenfranchised, and he actually feels like he's right because he wants to take back the world from people that have oppressed him and his ancestors for so many years. And it was a very well thought out character on paper, and I feel like it translated the screen very well.
Yep, and part of it was it had to be a great performance by Michael B. Jordan, and he delivers on that. And he had to establish himself as a proper foil for T'Challa, because T'Challa, as a character, doesn't really have any flaws.
That's my issue with the movie, yeah.
Maybe some amount of self-doubt, that he experienced at the beginning of this movie, perhaps not being able to follow in his father's footsteps or his ancestors' footsteps. But, he has all of the right characteristics to be a great king. So you don't really question that about him. And so the doubt comes into play when he's exposed to a viewpoint where he cannot help but agree with some of it. Maybe not the methods, but the spirit itself is something he has to agree with. And so that engenders a personal conflict on its own. Do we open a Wakanda, which is unprecedented for our people, or do we continue with the isolationist culture that's been, to be honest, successful, that worked very well for us for centuries? And obviously, it's a big question. It's a big decision that he has to make. It could be unpopular, but then you have this tension between tradition and modernism, which manifests itself in several ways in the movie. And so you basically, everything that happens in that movie makes sense because of that. Like you said, we have a couple of issues. The only issue I have personally was the character played by Daniel Kaluuya in terms of his reversal. He's very loyal to T'Challa, and as soon as Killmonger shows up with Ulysses Claw's body, he switches allegiances, which I thought was a little bit too sudden. And perhaps in deleted scenes or whatnot, there is enough footage to flesh that decision making a little bit more, but it felt pretty sudden and jarring.
For sure, because the whole theme of the movie, one of them is, I guess one of the many themes is loyalty, and Kaluuya, from some of the scenes that he's talking to T'Challa when he gets back from the whole thing with Sokovia and also the Nigeria stuff in the beginning of the movie. He has this unspoken bond with T'Challa, and for him to just turn on a dime after one scene, maybe it's a consequence of the fact that the original cut of the movie was almost 4 hours, but they really should have paid more attention to stuff on the cutting room floor. That I think that that really could have made that character a little better. And also, I'm going to say it again, some of the jokes are pretty cringy in that movie. Like the "what are those" joke made me slap. It's spelling pandering with a capital P.
I don't disagree. It was a necessary joke, but could have been pulled off a little bit better.
Wait, you thought it was necessary?
It was necessary.
How is it necessary?
It's part of her character. Again, she represents the more modern side, right? Somebody who, and M'Baku actually makes a note of that. Somebody who scoffs at tradition.
Okay, fair.
But she's somewhat Americanized, somewhat worldly.
She's modernized for sure. I agree with that. But there's a lot more clever ways to show that than making reference to an offhanded a Vine from 2014.
Right. And, she does do that in the immediate aftermath where she says, hey, these are the shoes I got for you. I call them sneakers.
Yeah.
Because they don't make any noise.
Yeah. See, that was a clever joke. That was cute. Like, that was nice. And the joke that preceded that.
But on its own, I don't think it's sufficient on its own. I think you have to do them both. But yeah, fine. It's cringy. I'll give you that.
Like, I'll give you an example. If she had said like "damn Daniel" like under her breath, that would have been funnier. But not as blatantly, here's a meme and hold the sign up to the screen with a big meme on it. Like, no, just it's like what are you wearing, brother? Damn Daniel. Like, that would have been funny. Like much more subtle than what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say "damn Daniel" was pretty. You probably went to more mainstream, at least in the beginning, but nobody says that anymore. What are those still sort of premieres to this day? Damn Daniel, they made it to Ellen DeGeneres show. Fine. I don't think that one of those guys did. But when was the last time you heard somebody say "damn Daniel"?
Okay,
it's been a while for me.
All right, whatever. We're gonna disagree, man. Like, we're not gonna. We're really good friends, Abdallah. We're not going to find a middle ground on this one.
No worries. We got more important things to get to, like Infinity War. We're finally there. And
with that, we're going to take a 2.5 minute break so I can not run to the bathroom. All right, we'll be right back. 3, 2, 1. And we're back. All right, so now that we've laid out in excruciating detail all of this stuff that's happened before Infinity War, we're going to get into the main event, Infinity War. So like we said in the beginning of this, I saw it last night, Abdallah on opening night. And yeah.
We had some time to ruminate over it.
For sure.
We sort of process everything and are able to actually put it into words what the experience was.
Yeah. So, one, I have never seen a movie theater so packed in my entire life. Like, every single seat was full. I was there 45 minutes ahead of time, and the line was literally around the corner. It was, like, absolutely insane. I've never experienced a movie like that.
Yeah, the way I was fortunate was the movie theater that I went to, you could assign your seat. The seats were assigned, so you buy your ticket.
Oh, I love those. Yeah.
I actually bought my ticket the day they were made available, which is I think about a month and a half ago. And I just selected those seats those particular ones. Because otherwise, if I would have to wait for them, just like you said, the line would have been ridiculous, and I probably would have ended up sitting in the front.
Yeah, I bought mine online like a couple days beforehand. But yeah, like that's a very European and UK thing, like to be able to like reserve your seats ahead of time. Like I think it's more theaters are doing that now, but I love that idea. Like, you know, if you actually want to make an event out of going to the movies, like it used to be, reserving your seat almost like a Broadway show would be pretty cool.
Right, exactly.
Where'd you sit?
It was basically right in the middle of the theater.
Did you were you in the back or the middle or the front or what?
I would say towards the back, but in the middle of the row. So you could see the entire... It was in IMAX 2D, so you could see the entire thing.
Oh, you saw it on IMAX?
I did see it in IMAX. So
How was it on IMAX? Was it awesome?
It was pretty awesome. Obviously, the sound effects are exaggerated. The image is larger, so it encompasses more of the image. So you don't really miss any details. And the parts that are really spectacular they do increase in gravity because of that.
Yeah, because this is one of the it's the first Marvel movie to be filmed completely on IMAX cameras.
The first movie in general, ever in the history.
Yeah. So I knew that Christopher Nolan did like 70% of Dunkirk on like IMAX cameras, and obviously his massive dogfight scenes were switching to like the IMAX ratio stuff. But
right.
But this is 100% IMAX. Wow,
100% IMAX.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Kind of like the way Avatar was shot 100% in 3D. This was the first movie to shoot 100% in IMAX because the technology has improved compared to The Dark Knight. Those cameras used to be very loud, very encumbrant. Now the cameras are smaller and a lot more malleable, so you're able to do a lot more with them.
For sure.
So this could be the norm where, well, obviously if the budget allows for it and if you have the right content, you could get away with filming the entire thing in IMAX.
That represents a kind of a new filmmaking draw too. That's very interesting. But
yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into it. So, something that I really liked about this movie was the fact that they didn't waste any time getting people caught up to speed. And this is why the movie works so well. It's a film for the fans. It's a film for people that are actually invested in the lore of this universe. And it literally picks up right when the post-credit scene of Thor Ragnarok, ends, which is really actually that's pretty profound even in its own right. It's like, something that a lot of audience members will probably leave after the last scene of Thor Ragnarok. If people that aren't expecting a post-credit scene, so they would never see Thanos' ship encountering Loki and Thor. And so that just kind of speaks to the fact that they made this movie for the fans, and that's something I really appreciated. And going off that, I mean, we see two major deaths within the first 4 minutes of the movie. Like, that's pretty
absolutely
nuts.
These were not just minor characters either. Yes, Heimdall doesn't have as much screen time over the entire series.
But this is the third movie. Yeah,
he's appeared in multiple movies. So, and obviously Loki headlined his own movie. He's been part of all the Thor movies. So he's a major character, and but the thing about Loki was his death counted. Like, he went out swinging. He wasn't, he knew what he was up against, and he still tried to kill Thanos. So he does go out with some amount of respect. And obviously Thor witnesses all of this, and he's devastated, rightfully so. But that comes into play later in this movie, where now he has a personal vendetta against Thanos in the way that he did not before, and that becomes important.
Yeah.
But then, what did that scene have to accomplish? The scene had to set up the stakes. Obviously, Thanos is there. He's all about his business. He's already got one Infinity Stone. He just acquired another one. So he's about 1/3 done with his task. And then, it sets up the secondary antagonist, which is the Black Order. We've never seen them before until this movie. But we see, Ebony Maw, the way he uses his tongue. That's his major weapon, is his tongue. So we saw glimpses of that. We saw the physicality of the other characters. And, obviously, we see the role that they have to play. There are 2 Infinity Stones on Earth. They have to split up to go retrieve them. So the conflicts that are going to ensue afterwards do have a basis within the plot. Thanos sends them to go retrieve the Infinity Stones. Yeah. And obviously, before he does that, Heimdall sends the Hulk back to Earth, to the Sanctum Sanctorum, so he can actually warn them about the incoming attack. So again, going from that scene to the New York scene, there is continuity there because the character of Hulk was there, and that sort of informs why he doesn't want to reappear. The Hulk doesn't want to come back.
Because he got the crap beaten out of him by Thanos, like one of the first people ever, that besides the Abomination in the first Hulk movie, the first one that actually physically overpowered the Hulk. Like it's
right. So, him and Thor fought to a stalemate in Thor Ragnarok, but you can always, at that time, you could still argue that Hulk was a stronger character, but now he was completely outmatched.
Yeah.
And so, you're gonna feel some type of way about that. So he goes and just underscores the urgency. Thanos is coming. He sent Loki. He's way more powerful than that. And he just went through a bunch of Asgardians like it was nothing, like they weren't even there. So the stakes are there. And obviously, yes, there is some amount of urgency, but you still sort of have to establish the universe you had already laid down, which is a universe where humor is prevalent. So you're going to have these funny scenes between Tony Stark and Doctor Strange. That's natural. Obviously, the Hulk is also... And the nice thing about the Hulk is the Hulk was not present during Civil War, so he doesn't know what's going on. So he's sort of the audience surrogate where he's learning about what the situation was. Hey, the Avengers broke up. What the hell? Why did they break up? We have to call Captain America. Otherwise, Vision might be exposed. Vision has the Mind Stone. He needs protection. That's why that's why in the next scene, we see Scarlet Witch and Vision together. They're getting attacked by 2 members of the Black Order. Captain America is there because Bruce Banner called him. So setting the plot in motion in a way that actually makes sense. Yeah,
I would agree. I think one of my main issues of the movie, and it's not really even an issue, it's like, in hindsight, it doesn't really matter, but having these characters like the Black Order and not really knowing who they are and what they are, I thought that was a little bit of a detraction from the plot. But when I really think about it, like, you're not there to learn that. I didn't care. Right. I didn't care as much about the motivation of those characters. Like, I know that, like, they're humble servants to Thanos, and that's all I really need to know about them. But, like, you never heard the name Ebony Maw. You just hear, like, when Iron Man meets up with Thanos later, so I take it you killed Maw, or Doctor Strange says that. It's like, I take it you killed Maw, and there aren't really any, like, bids to their actual identities. They're just kind of like, big honking people that fight on behalf of Thanos, which is fine.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the point. The Russo brothers didn't need to spend any time setting them up. They're just these physical forces that are going to challenge the Avengers somewhat, and maybe not necessarily succeed in their endeavors. However, one thing I do like about the Black Order is they do play a specific role for a specific character. So like Ebony Maw and Doctor Strange, because they have the same powers, they had to be foils of each other. Yeah. But then also Proxima Midnight and Black Widow were also on the same trajectory as well, because she's the one who ended up defeating her. So, they were in the trajectory the whole time. Obviously somebody like Corvus Glaive and Vision were in that trajectory as well. The only one that was probably underused or wasted was Black Dwarf, or I think in this movie they call him Cold Obsidian, the big one.
Yeah.
Obviously he can't talk, so all he can be is just this physical
Muscle,
presence. Yeah. So, but he wasn't particularly overwhelming in any way. I mean, it's not like he's not like his brawn was very obvious or helping.
Yeah, he was just a big brute, like, you know.
He was just a big brute. And he didn't accomplish anything. But, you know, obviously Ebony Maw's powers were important. And Proxima Midnight, her presence was important in terms of her interaction. He actually interacted with characters in a way that only Ebony Maw really did otherwise.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I don't really have any complaints about that. I mean, you know, they're malevolent servants to Thanos, and that's really all you need to know about them.
Yeah,
like, you know,
plot devices.
And like, you know, I wasn't even made aware of them until, like, you know, the announcement of the movie and the hot toy thing like came out. Like I didn't really give a shit about them, to be honest, but they served their purpose. They were antagonists, like, you know, secondarily to Thanos. And that kind of leads me into, you know, I did a little complaining with the Black Order first, but my biggest praise for the movie is the fact that the limited characterization, one, is laid out in the other movies for the heroes, because we don't really even know about their motivations. We know all their motivations. We know why they're fighting, for example.
Right.
The thing I thought was really impressive is the fact that, you know, they did it in a clever way in which that Thanos, this was his movie. Like, he was the penultimate character of the entire film. And not only that, like, I wouldn't say that I ever sympathized with Thanos, but, you know, like we were saying, like, I think that it's really important to understand why the villain believes that they're correct. And
yes,
yeah, and you know, we've talked about it, you know, off this podcast with someone like Mordo and Doctor Strange. Like, he wants to serve as, you know, I guess the limiting factor for magic in the world, because he's seen what too much magic and too many sorcerers will do to the fabric of reality. So in that sense, Mordo believes that he's correct. And with Thanos, you know, he's almost like an optimist. It's like he perfect balances his you know, his calling and what he really strives for in the universe. And, you know, taken out of context, like someone not looking for genocide of an entire, you know, like universe's population, but balance and composure is something that, you know, we as humans always look to for, you know, motivated for a lot of actions. And to have somebody who is completely bastardizing it, of course, like he's going to kill half the people in the universe, but his goal is somewhat altruistic in a kind of a weird way. And I didn't expect,
yes.
I didn't expect to feel that way about Thanos, but, like, you know, and they did it like, you know, they hinted at it throughout the entire film, but only until he used the Reality Stone with Doctor Strange and explains, like, you know, his people didn't listen to him, and therefore, like, you know, he's the last one of his kind. So he doesn't want it to happen to, you know, other races of, you know, the galaxy, and he is ready to, you know, rip up the fabric of time and reality of evidently to accomplish that. And that was something that I didn't really expect to understand, but I did. And, you know, Thanos was a superb character. I think probably the best villain that's been in the MCU for sure. And,
oh yeah,
and that's not even talking about
to agree with that.
And that's not even talking about the CGI. I mean, the CGI and Josh Brolin was incredible. Like, there are a couple wonky lighting moments when he was, like, picking people up and stuff, but just the face of Josh Brolin, like, superimposing the Thanos, that was absolutely magnificent. Like, for sure, it was really, really good.
You know, like you said, the hallmarks of a great villain is that you not only are able to sympathize with them to some extent, but you also can see the logic of their motivation. So no matter how nefarious they are, in Thanos' case, like you said, his motivation was to, you know, get rid of half the life in the universe because the universe was imbalanced. And, you know, the theme of balance, they do show it not metaphorically, literally, with the knife that he gives Gamora the day he meets her.
Yeah.
You know, this is perfectly balanced as all things should be. And like you said, he has personal experience with imbalance and what he can do. You know, his own people were destroyed by having an imbalanced universe within that imbalanced life ecosystem within that planet. He warned them. They didn't listen. His planet got destroyed as a result. But he not only does he have a personal example of that not working, but he also has a personal example of that working. So with Gamora's planet, he destroys half of the world there. They were suffering from poverty, but then once he did that, it's an idyllic place. It's like a heaven, the way he puts it. So he knows that his plan will work on a micro level. So just apply it blanketly to the entire universe. Presumably, everything will be back in balance. And there is something, so like you said, it's altruistic and noble. The noble thing about it is the way he goes about, at least the way he envisions these people dying, it's a completely random event. It doesn't discriminate for any, no matter how rich you are, your age, your utility in whatever ecosystem you live in, it doesn't take that into account. It's completely random. And so for those reasons, you can sort of fail to see the logical fallacy within his plan. Obviously, because he's going to be responsible for so many lives, that is inherently evil for that reason. But if you give it enough, in theory, if you give it enough time, you'll see that ultimately he actually may end up saving some species from dying. And so, he believes in his calling. But the reason why he's such a fully fleshed out character is he doesn't just stop at that noble goal. Part of it is seeped into his own ego. He does believe himself to be a god based on those actions. And he speaks like a god too. And I think was it Star-Lord? I think Star-Lord is the one who tells him either Star-Lord or Gamora, who tells him you'll never be a god. Yeah. Because the way he speaks, when he tells, I think, Tony Stark his plan, he says, what's going to happen at the end? He's like, well, at the end, I'm going to rest and contemplate on my good work. Just like, you can say in the Bible, he said God made the earth made the universe in 6 days and then rested. Yeah, and that's what he does in the end. He rests just like a God would, and admiring the good work that he's done. But then at the same time feeling slightly guilty about it because of what it cost. And he knows it will cost everything, but then he's willing to risk all of that. And in the end, do you really get satisfaction from doing the right thing, or do you get sadness from having lost everything that you held dear to you in order to get there? And I think that point was brought together very well by the final scene. So it just brought everything into full circle and just elevated the level of that character at the end. And I thought it was very well done by the Russo brothers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like we already said a million times, Thanos is a very, very good villain. We understood him. It's like you said, it's like it's even though like, you think yourself in a situation like that, what would you do? And, obviously we think that as independently acting and rational people, we wouldn't, morally be able to exterminate, all these people at the snap of our fingers. But like you said, when you really think about it, there's really not a lot of downsides as opposed, except, the momentary, killing of hundreds of millions of people. But it's hard to find a logical fallacy in his plan. Like it's very well thought out, and he truly believes that he's right. I think it's the most important part of that, which is, obviously it's a monstrous act, but super well thought out motivations for Thanos. I thought that was, awesome. And
in that respect, I would say Thanos is like what Ultron should have been.
That's what I was going to say. Like, so even though the movie is a bit overcrowded, of course, because there's so many characters in it and so many plot points to get to, Age of Ultron had a lot of the same problems, and there were a few too many characters in that one. But because the villain has a clear place in the plot and the overall theme of the story, the villain kind of ties the whole thing together, and it's a bonus that he's like the main character. Ultron was a wisecracking robot that, didn't really have any kind of, semblance of a logical plan. Like all he wanted to do is just, blow up the world. There's no reason for why he wanted to do it. He's like the typical like, oh, I'm right and you're wrong. But in Thanos' case, we see why that he may be correct in his thinking.
Well, there were some. So Ultron is not the first character of his kind. I can think of like Skynet from the Terminator universe, where if you have a robot that becomes self-aware and they really go through human history and looked at everything, they will see that we humans are murderous creatures. We always engage in war, and the best way to save the planet from our evil is to destroy us.
Yeah.
So, and that's the first thing that he comes to believe. With Skynet believes that right away and shoots missiles at us as soon as he becomes self-aware. Ultron sort of does the same thing, but and it just doesn't come together the way it should have been for a properly well characterized villain, the way that it does for Thanos. I think sort of the you can say the motivations were similar, but the execution was different, obviously.
Yeah.
Both intent on committing genocide, but for Ultron, he wants the world to evolve, but then that doesn't mean destroying the entire world. Where Thanos conceived of a similar plan, but has the right execution, you can say, and Ultron did not. So just another way for them to really rectify some of the things some of the missteps in the universe that they created.
No, for sure. So, I mean, I like the movie a lot. I don't know if there's really anything I can say that's like too negative about it. But I mean, we've kind of done a lot of praising, of course. But what would you think are some things the movie could have done better, or maybe some critiques you have?
Well, what are the two critiques that people will come up with is that, yes, it's because it's an overcrowded movie, you only have so much time to focus on certain characters. And I feel like some people might be cheated because some characters they would have conceived to be important players didn't really have that much of a role. Somebody like a Black Panther, for example, besides his leadership in the battle, didn't really have much to do in this movie. Instead, it was actually Shuri. Shuri was the Wakandan character who has the most to do. And even her role was not complete, but sort of the seeds were planted a little bit for what happens in the next movie. Because of her role, you sort of have a way, or at least a plan put in motion to get Vision back. You won't get the original version of Vision, but you can have some amount of
his personality
Vision back. Yeah, so she was important in order to get that point across. Some of the, obviously this movie had to focus on very few characters. Most importantly, Doctor Strange, Tony Stark, Star-Lord, and Gamora were very important. Spider-Man was important for a different reason. And then Captain America and Thor. So I would say those are the only characters who you remove them from, obviously Thanos. Let's say those 8 characters are the only characters for whom, if you remove them from the story loses all meaning. Yeah. So, they're integral to the plot. So Thor is the person who loses everything at the beginning of this movie and is on a personal path towards revenge. But he's also the only person capable of defeating Thanos. And we see that at the end where he basically levels up again once he gets his new his Stormbreaker, the axe. And actually, you can say he morally wounds Thanos before Thanos is able to actually carry out his plan. So that entire arc was set up pretty well and executed very well. My audience was pretty tame, but the moment where Thor arrives in Wakanda was the one moment they couldn't help but cheer. It was a great moment.
Yeah, they cheer for that too, and also Captain America. My favorite cheer for that one when they saw him for the first time.
When I saw him the first time, absolutely. And I wish they didn't show that in the trailer. It was such a badass moment where he catches that spear.
Oh yeah, and like the shadowy figure, like from the train, like that was pretty sick. I wish they didn't spoil that.
Yeah. It was one of the shames of you have to have trailers. Obviously, he needs to be there. You just don't show that.
I think from this point forward, I think this movie showed me that I'm gonna stop watching trailers. I think it's like I love going into a movie and not knowing a single thing. Like for the day that I saw the movie, I didn't look at my phone or the computer once. Like I turned off my Wi-Fi on my computer at work. Like I only got on to like look at NMRs and stuff like from the server. But I literally didn't look at one single thing about the movie. I didn't hear reviews. I just wanted to go in as completely blind as possible because that's when all the payoffs happen. And to your point,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah. And so to your point, like we were talking about in the beginning of this whole thing, if you view Infinity War as just a movie and like another chapter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't think it really holds up that well because, a good, litmus test for a movie being great is if you detract all the other factors outside the movie, does the movie still work? And of course, if you subtract all the other movies outside of this one singular movie, of course it doesn't work because all the motivation is set up in other movies. But if you view this thing as kind of, I think Event, like you said, was a great way to put it. Like this is a 2 hour and 40-minute payoff for everything that's kind of preceded it in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And of course you can find critiques and say that it's a movie that doesn't really have a place and it seems kind of out of nowhere and it has overkill and stuff. But I viewed it as this is something that's been bidded at and has been hinted at for years and years and years. And then to have it synthesize itself together in a way that's, critically and audience accepted, I think that it serves you well to not think of it as just another chapter, but as as a bookend to the universe. I think is a more appropriate way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know, man.
Yeah, so I think those 8 characters that I named had to be the focus, and I think they all have been served very well,
For sure.
in the way that they deserve. Obviously, Doctor Strange, there is an element of dramatic irony there because he's seen something that we haven't. He's seen the one version of the future where everything works out. But then you as the audience member, you can sort of, yes, you're like, no, don't give him the stone. But you can sort of understand what he's thinking because the moment that he hesitates before he gives the stone, what I thought was happening was he was basically putting his own magic into it before he lets him use it. So that when he uses it, he builds in his own, let's say his own loophole, if you will. So that when Thanos uses it, then the way to actually defeat him is actually already in place. So doing that, I don't know if I said Scarlet Witch in my list of characters. Scarlet Witch and Vision, those are important as well. You can't take them out of the story.
Yeah.
So Doctor Strange knows what needs to happen in order for Thanos to be defeated, and you actually have to let him win. He has to win before he can lose. So that was important. Obviously, with Gamora, she has the most personal connection with Thanos, and she's the only one that Thanos actually loved. So the scenes that they shared together, I thought were very well done. And the scenes that, involved Nebula as well, I thought were very well done as well. Obviously when she thought she killed him in Nowhere, when she cries, like she sobs as she gives him the death blow, just to show that she's been looking forward to it for so long, but she didn't realize how much it would hurt her. And obviously, he was him playing with all of them. Yeah. And, part of it was also, maybe some people would complain about Star-Lord, the way he reacts to her death. He's the reason why their original plan to disarm Thanos did not work, is because
he kept punching him and stuff
as soon as he learned that she was dead, he basically turned full human, let his emotions overpower him, and snapped Thanos out of his trance, and obviously woke him up.
See, like that's where I would disagree with people, because like they're saying it's so out of character for like Star-Lord.
It is not.
Yeah, exactly. So I was gonna say that it is not out of character, because like every time something like that terrible has happened, he's lost control of himself because he's so afraid of losing people that he loves that the next time he loses somebody like that, it's too much for him. And like Gamora was like, the last person that he really loved. Like, his mother watched her die when he was a kid. Father, learned that not only did he kill his mother, but like he had this nefarious plot, so he had to die. And so even if you hated him, like still have that connection to him. And so Gamora was like, the last piece of his heart that was just ripped out. And it makes sense for Star-Lord to completely fly off the handle.
Lose his mind, yeah.
Yeah. And what you talked about with the dramatic irony of Doctor Strange, I thought that was a really clever plot point because it opens up a lot of avenues for what's going to happen in Avengers 4.
Absolutely.
And it makes him the overseer that we were kind of talking about at the beginning of this whole video. Like he knows something we don't, but he knows that, there's one way where the Avengers win. And for that, for a time being, like all their souls are going to have to be dissipated from the earth, like and let the events play out. And I think it's, it's kind of fitting because the only people that are really left, sans a couple characters, are the 4 core members of the Avengers, and it's gonna be interesting to see how they, as characters, will not only save the world and phase themselves out, but also phase these new Avengers in. So I think that's why they've held back on disclosing the title of the next movie, because apparently like it kind of gives away the whole theme of the story, according to the Russo brothers. So I mean, they could have gone with something like Infinity Gauntlet or whatever, but like I think that's kind of like kind of a cheap way to do it. But I think that the title will be something like like Avengers Reassembled or some shit like that, or the New Avengers or something like Avengers. That. Yeah.
I don't think it would be that on the nose, but the really clever thing is they ended the movie in such a way that you really don't, like, you can come up with as many theories as you can, but until you see the actual movie, you can't figure out how the plot is going to go. It could go a million ways. We can talk, we will have a section about prognostications and how we think the future will go, but it really is not something straightforward. Like, it can go so many ways. The original Avengers are alive. Presumably, I think Ant-Man will be alive as well, so he'll play a big role in the next one. And obviously, Captain Marvel is coming in, so that's going to be interesting for us to see. We know it's coming. We're looking forward to her own movie, but then what is going to be her role within Infinity War? Because apparently she's.
So what do you think about the post-credit scene when Samuel L. Jackson was cut off saying "motherfucker"?
I think, again, very clever. And I really like that scene because you have to show consequences, because what Thanos did was worldwide. It wasn't just the people who were present. Yeah. It was universe-wide. So obviously, what are the practical consequences of people being erased as time, in real time? Obviously, imagine if you were inside of a plane and the pilot got erased, the plane would crash. So, or a boat or whatever. Let's say you were in the middle of a NASCAR race, half the drivers got erased, probably everybody would wreck. So I think that scene did a pretty good job of showing what are the practical consequences of people being erased in real time. And obviously the stakes were very high. They were on a universal scale, so you got to call in your biggest gun, which is Captain Marvel. And Samuel L. Jackson is the only, Nick Fury is the only character who has some type of relationship with her, so it was natural for him to be the one to call her in.
And not only that, but knows she exists.
Knows she exists. Yeah. And, so it makes us look forward to her movie as well. But you need your biggest guns against Thanos, because Thor had to be super overpowered to even. So one of the most striking scenes was when Star-Lord's plan was working so well and the Avengers on planet Titan were really, really holding their own against Thanos. They had a lot of licks in. They were able to punch him many times. And the culmination of all of their effort, Thanos was like, all of this for just a drop of blood, to underscore just how powerful he was. And so it really took somebody on the level of Thor and maybe Hulk to defeat him.
Well, and I mean, Hulk got overpowered in 15 seconds in the beginning of the movie. It kind of proves that Thor is at its rudiment, the strongest Avenger.
Right, exactly. So Captain Marvel is on that level. So you really need her as well as Thor in order to be actually able to defeat him. Yeah,
for sure.
Part of it is you're gonna have to get that gauntlet off of him. So how do you do that? That's something for the other characters to figure out. Yeah.
So, we can talk about the actual comics. In one of the most popular manifestations of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline, basically what happens is, we're kind of shown in the movie that Thanos thinks of himself and wants to be a god. And so what happens is he essentially gives up his body and joins like the Celestials and stuff because he has the power to do that with the gauntlet. So he leaves his body basically unguarded, and then Nebula basically gets the gauntlet off of him, and they get him restrained. And then by the time he gets his gauntlet, by the time he gets back to his body, it's already too late, and Nebula basically wills everybody back to existence. So I think that would really fit in well. I again, like you said, I have no idea how the movie's going to go, which is, I think it's, very clever thing they did because, you can speculate all you want, but you have no idea how it's actually going to pan out until you actually sit down and watch the movie. But I think that it's probably safe to say that Nebula will probably be the one that will, get to bring everybody back because, of course, there are sequels planned and shit. like everyone's coming back. But the fact that they've made Nebula kind of a more titular character in the last couple of movies, like the first two Guardians, and then this obviously, you see why she has such a hatred of Thanos, especially in this movie, and then having her kill Gamora and basically half of all of her friends. That serves her well to kind of, to segue into that role that's basically going to defeat Thanos, through no fault of his own.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, so I would say prior to this movie, she had the most motivation to kill him because it was completely personal for her. Same with Gamora, it was completely personal for her to get rid of Thanos. The events of this movie, I would say they placed Thor ahead of her in the pecking order of who deserves to kill Thanos more, I would say. Because Thanos doesn't really take a lot from Nebula. He takes her body, he tortures her the whole time.
Okay, when she was a kid, she was slowly replaced by bionic parts. Like I think that she has the most reason to kill him.
Yes, but that's it. Thor, the guy killed his brother. The guy killed Heimdall. He killed his entire people. Well, not entire. I think half of his people. That was the line that he says. Which I think that was a way for them to give themselves an out because some of the key characters in Thor Ragnarok do not show up in this movie, like Valkyrie and Korg and Meek. Like, presumably they're still alive somewhere. They were able to escape before Thanos got to them.
I really wanted the post-credit scene with Korg, like, "Hey man, I went to the dust. What happened, man? Hey man, we're gonna get out of here. Don't stop Thanos. Wanna come?"
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, sure. I mean,
but
you don't know what's going
kind of
on
some
with
levity, but yeah.
But Thor has legitimate gripes against Thanos now. Star-Lord did as well, but Star-Lord is erased.
Yeah.
So now it's down to Nebula and Thor. So it's got to be one of those two. Obviously, Nebula, that connection is more personal. Thor is more, here is me taking revenge on behalf of the universe against this guy who took everything from me. So yeah, it's interesting in that regard. I think one of those two will be the one to do it for sure. But then on the other hand, the movie does something very interesting. It put Tony Stark and Thanos in a parallel sort of arc because, if you remember, just to go slightly off topic, but some like the movie Godzilla back in 2014, the main character was the only human that Godzilla actually looked at, because Godzilla was so above all these humans that they weren't worthy of being looked at by him. So when Godzilla made contact with the main character, that was the important moment. Thanos is sort of similar. He's so much above all of the Avengers that the only time he ever acknowledges any of them by name is Tony Stark. Saying, you're the only one. You're not the only one burdened by knowledge. By knowledge. He actually respects Tony Stark a lot. He says,
I hope
you've done a lot for the world. I hope they remember you. You deserve to be remembered for all the things that you've done. And so that elevates the importance of Tony Stark to get on Thanos' level. And then towards the end, when Captain America resists him, is very peculiar that, Thanos was completely taken aback that somebody is able to actually resist him the way Captain America did. So in that way,
that calls back to Age of Ultron too. I mean, like, you know, the only person that ever budged Thor's hammer a tiny bit, with the exception of Vision, actually picks it up because the Mind Stone is Captain America. He actually budges it, and Thor like looks at him like,
right.
So, it's kind of a callback to something like that, where like those characters are a lot more powerful than you give them credit for, which is
that's a good point.
Yeah, which is kind of weird because like Captain America is just like a super soldier. Like, you know, I have no really idea how strong he actually is.
Presumably, his strength is only limit. He doesn't have a limit based on his will. Like whatever his will is, he's gonna take that strength along with him. So
yeah,
let's say he's trying to bench press. You put 1,000 pounds in there, he's gonna lift it. You put 2,000 pounds in there, as long as he has the will, he's probably gonna be able to lift it as well. So that's kind of how his power scale is. He scales depending on what is needed. Yeah. And obviously he has an uncanny ability to sacrifice everything for the sake of the greater good. Yeah. The greater good. So, you know, I think, well, maybe we can finish some of the details of this particular movie before we start speculating about the next one.
Sure. So Gamora's death, I thought, was handled very, very well. I was, you know, that was the biggest question in this movie. You know, how are they gonna handle the Soul Stone? Because we not only have we never seen it, but we've also are unfamiliar with what the powers are, and it's definitely the most mysterious stone. So for people,
I think that was up by design. We still don't know what it does, but they'll probably focus on it in the next movie.
So basically, like for people who read the comics, like which I did, the Soul Stone basically it gives you power and dominion over every soul, living and dead. And so basically you have an empathetic connection to everybody. You can basically, it's like almost like an overblown version of the Mind Stone, where basically you have dominion over every soul. And also something that's interesting is, you know how after Thanos basically commits the deed, he goes into that orange kind of weird realm where like Gamora's there.
Yeah, that's the soul world, right?
Yeah, so that's what they're thinking. That, you know, basically the Soul Stone gives you access to a pocket universe that, you know, you can enter into, and basically all of the souls that have ever been, you know, killed or have passed on are basically encased in the stone. So it's you know, possible that everybody who is, you know, gone now from the MCU is probably residing in the Soul Stone, which, I mean, we'll get to, but yeah, like
that's probably how they will get free.
Exactly. So I think that, like, you know, someone's gonna get the gauntlet. I have a theory
about that.
Yeah, someone's gonna get the gauntlet, and someone's gonna free them, and then someone's gonna say, like, turn back time to, you know, maybe even, you know, to the first Avengers, and they basically like they destroy some of the stones early or something like that, which would be kind of interesting. But
now so they actually do give themselves an out as well. We kind of know how to destroy them.
Yeah,
you have to use something with their own energy signature, which is Scarlet Witch was created by the Mind Stone.
Yeah,
so her energy signature is able to destroy it. Now, could it destroy the other stones? Probably. But there is a way to destroy them. There is a way to undo the damage that he's done. But I think there's also an indirect way of getting into the soul world, which we can discuss a little bit later.
Yeah, no.
I would say if I were to, you know, expand on any issues that I had issues with the character of Groot. I felt like he was playing in that game way too long. I didn't think it was appropriate for him to do that beyond that one scene.
Yeah, you know? That's kind of an issue for some of the characters in Guardians of the Galaxy, that they're not only underpowered, but they're just played for jokes as opposed to like actually fleshing out their character. Like, for example, in the comics, I mean, and again, I say this a million times, I'm not big on the whole like everything's got to be accurate to the comics thing. Like, it kind of recontextualizes some things for me, at least. But in the comics, Drax is actually feared by Thanos. Like, Drax is like to Thanos what Thor is to Thanos in the movie, like in the comics. Like, you know, Drax is like this energy manipulating, super strong, rage-filled guy, and all he is comic relief and some, you know, a pair of biceps in the movie. And even that, like, he's not even that strong in the movie. So it's like they kind of serve him as, you know, a comedic undertone for the movie, and same thing with Groot. Like,
it doesn't really do a whole lot, does he? Even in that fight against Thanos.
Exactly. Like, and you know, like, he's this silly guy, which, I mean, it's funny for sure, but like, it's like what we've talked about, where it's like they have that audience type character for comedy, and basically he laughs and does like weird things to elicit reaction from the audience and basically to mirror how we're supposed to feel. And at a certain point, yeah, it's funny, but like that whole that too literal kind of humor is just kind of tiresome at a certain point. Like I just kind of got sick of it. And so the same thing with Groot. Like, they play the fact that he's this adolescent, you know, like, hey, Groot, like, you know, teenager for the movie for a joke. And yeah, it's funny when he first does it, but like, to have that just keep going on and on and on, it just got kind of repetitive. And
it doesn't. It's basically until Thor is half dead that he actually looks up from that game, and I thought that was that's not. I thought that was pretty inappropriate. I think they should have done him a little bit better. You know, how are you gonna do him like that?
Yeah, and also, like, I mean, but like, oh, shoot. When you think about it, I mean, Groot is kind of the weirdest character in the MCU, and he's so not human that, I mean, yeah, he's going to be kind of silly and stuff, but I think just from a story writing and storytelling standpoint, I feel like they could have given his character a little more something to do, as opposed to just being a sidekick for Rocket and Thor. Now, I will say, in that sense, I thought the scenes between Thor and Rocket Raccoon were very, very good.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, like, and that's, before we get into all the negatives in the movie, that was something that I really found interesting, is the fact that they took these characters that don't really have any context to their interaction besides the fact they're, you know, superheroes or characters in the same universe, and they actually made their interactions somewhat, you know, palpable and believable. Like, for Rocket Raccoon, he's a guy who's known immense tragedy. They never reference it in this movie, and even in other movies. But when he's talking to Thor, there's this kind of implied, you know, understanding that Rocket brings to the situation, where, like, you know, Thor's crying. He's lost everyone he's ever loved, and he accepts that he's on a suicide mission to kill Thanos. And the fact that Rocket is the one who talks to him, a talking raccoon, like, is kind of silly. But when you really think about it, his character makes sense for him to talk to him like that.
It had to be him. It couldn't be anyone else, really. I don't think Star-Lord is serious enough for it necessarily.
For sure. And if Drax was maybe more serious and like their original take of the character, maybe he could have been that person. But
Drax lost everybody too.
Yeah, and Thanos actually killed everyone he's ever loved, so he's actually a good parallel to what's happened with Thor. But
right.
But you know, I thought that was great. Like, they brought characters that really don't have much to do with one another, but they had them interact in a way that was actually productive to the plot and also entertaining.
Yeah. As far as I know, I feel like that's the only sort of complaint that I had. I can't really say the same thing about the Black Order, because to me they didn't really serve a bigger purpose than they actually had in this movie.
They were just muscle. Yeah.
They were just muscle. They had to be eliminated. It helped in the context of some people like Doctor Strange and Black Widow, and just those, and Scarlet Witch. You know, it was sort of cathartic for those two to be the ones who get rid of the people, the Black Order in Wakanda. You know, Scarlet Witch and Black Widow are the ones who destroy the two members there in Wakanda. I think that makes sense for their characters, but otherwise, they served their purpose. They served it well. You move on. But yeah, that's pretty much the only issue I had. I thought, in terms of the tone, the switching tone, I thought it was sort of finding its legs in the beginning. I thought, you know, those transitions were not as smooth as they were towards the end once. Because, you know, this... Maybe it may not make so much sense to you, but this movie kind of played out like an episode of Game of Thrones, where
no, for sure. I've seen Game of Thrones. Like, I would agree with that for sure.
You have like all these characters in different locations. You jumped from one location to the other, but the difference here is that there is a logical thread between them. Like I said, the Hulk was present when Thanos defeated Asgard, the Asgardians. He was on Earth. He warned them against the Black Order. The Black Order showed up. They fought in New York. Spider-Man was there. Spider-Man had to be involved. Then Ebony Maw captures Doctor Strange. Then they go on that ship. Iron Man and Spider-Man follow them. That's how they end up on Titan. At the same time, you had the Guardians of the Galaxy responding to the distress signal by the Asgardians, and then they come into contact with Thor. They learn about the Avengers from Thor. That's important, and then that's how they end up on Titan as well. And so the fact that because they met Thor, and it saves them a lot of time, because normally what you would have expected was when the Guardians show up on Titan and they start fighting against Doctor Strange, Iron Man, and Spider-Man, you would have expected that fight to be a little bit longer because it's a whole misunderstanding. But they don't have time for something like that. So you say, hey, we both know Thor, we're good. Those are the things that this movie is able to do, because you've earned the right to skip over those things. And they have time to formulate a plan before Thanos gets there. That Thanos gets there, they execute the plan. It works until Star-Lord finds out that he killed Gamora. That works because it had to be the moment where the plan basically goes to shit. The plan couldn't just fail for no reason. It had to fail for a very personal reason, and it did that. Yeah. So it's just a well-designed movie. They actually, we know that they spend a lot of time on the script getting everything right, but then once you take care of all these details before you actually put pen to paper, you're able to execute it in the moment, and I think they did for the most part. It's just a little bit of hiccup with characterizations, some CGI. The Black Order CGI wasn't that great. You had some moments with Thanos and stuff like that. Otherwise, I thought it was.
What was the guy's name who fought Vision? It was a Corvus Glaive. Is that his
Corvus Glaive, yeah, Corvus Glaive.
Yeah, his CGI was my biggest complaint. He looked absolutely god awful in the movie. Like I haven't seen actually worse like superhero CGI since the last fight scene in Black Panther, to be completely honest.
Well, that was only like a few seconds, but yeah, I can see what you're saying. I know exactly what scene you're talking about.
Yeah. It was just like to have like some elements be flawless and some elements be god awful. Like you should spend a little more time in the editor's chair and make sure that all your animation like looks good, not only in the context of the movie, but comparing to other scenes in the movie. Like if some scenes look absolutely flawless and then some scenes look crappy, it just makes the movie kind of disjointed, just, through no fault of its own. And I had similar complaints to you. Like there were a couple of things that went on too long. Some of the character stuff was kind of out of place. And also there's something where I get it that Marvel movies have to be tongue-in-cheeky humor. Like it's mainstream entertainment for the entire planet. It's supposed to appeal to everybody. It's supposed to be like, fun and lighthearted, but also some stakes. But after Gamora dies, I forget what the scene is following that right afterwards, but like they were cracking jokes like a second or two afterwards. And I'm just like, that just seems kind of out of place. Like if they had like the tongue-in-cheek humor in the beginning and then leading up to Gamora's death, and then after that it becomes like a dark, somber movie, I feel like we're already invested in the movie to a certain point where we don't need the tongue-in-cheek humor. We don't need that stuff anymore. And like now we just want to have the actual plot go to its logical ends. I feel like that would have been a little more appropriate, but
yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, like like you have this character and like it's not only like a big moment for Gamora, like she dies, but also for Thanos. Like you actually see that this monstrous person is actually capable of love, and to have that be undercut with a joke a few minutes later is something that we've already talked about that in in private conversations about like how they undercut certain plot points with jokes, which we'll release that episode in a couple weeks about superhero and humor in superhero movies and why it's great in some cases and terrible, but in other cases. But
yeah, the biggest culprit in this movie was definitely when Gamora and Star-Lord actually end up kissing, which is the first time they did it.
That Drax
That's a big
thing.
moment. And then Drax is right there eating like peanuts,
And like it was like, okay, if they did it like for a second, I get it, like it's a quirky thing, but to have it actually go on for like another 2 minutes, and then Mantis comes in the joke too, and it's like, I'm not invisible. Hi, Mantis. like what the like. It was just like it was just so unnecessary. It's like
Yeah, that was James Gunn. That wasn't the Russo brothers. I feel like, he did say he wrote every scene that the Guardians were in. I feel like the Russo brothers could have done without that if it was only them on their own.
Yeah.
But some of the, I feel like some of the humor, like something that DC fans especially complain about, is the sort of casualness that they go about fighting. Like when they're fighting, we saw some of that in Civil War, where like, what's his name? Black Hawkeye and Black Panther are fighting, and Hawkeye is like, "Hey, we haven't met yet. I'm Clint," and he's like, "I don't care." In this film, obviously, when Thor gets to Wakanda, it's the first time that he's seen any of the Avengers in a while, and then he has that moment with Captain America. Hey, you got a haircut? Oh, hey, I saw you copy my beard. That's kind of weird, but that's sort of what Marvel does.
Yeah, but
he's
also
like, hey,
like,
this is my friend Groot.
Yeah, and to the defense of that moment, at least that moment of levity actually serves the story. Like, it's like, oh yeah, wait a minute. You think about it, and Thor hasn't seen these people in years, so it's like, what the hell? And then they have a joke actually like acknowledging that. And so, yeah, it can be kind of out of place, but at least that moment of levity actually serves the story. The purpose of that whole Drax thing, just doing that funny thing, was only for the sake of having a break in levity from the dramatic moment that preceded it. And that's just like have humor actually serve a purpose. Don't just like it's not a Judd Apatow movie. You're not making a dick joke. Like, it's like you have to actually you have to actually have your humor serve a certain purpose in the story, and
embrace the drama when you have it.
Exactly.
Don't undercut it.
Yeah, it can enrich and it can bookend the scene, but if used incorrectly, it can just be kind of tiresome. And that's something that I've had a complaint with Drax's character. Even though that I love the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, like they're just kind of they kind of rely too much on like that, like meta self-aware humor that you would see in something like Deadpool, for example. But and that kind of creates a tone conflict in the story. But I mean, again, like those are kind of small complaints. I left very satisfied with the movie. All my check boxes were pretty much like ticked off.
Same here.
Yeah, the ending with the dust thing, that was, I don't know how else they could have done it to like, show it be some kind of dramatic moment. I like the fade in the dust thing. Yeah, it's kind of a cliche, but I really don't. I can't think of any other way that they would actually do it and have it actually work. So I don't have a problem.
It had to be that way, but the way you anchor it is the way they did it, which is so one thing I noticed. Maybe this is something I'll notice more when I watch it a second time, is for the characters who were disappearing didn't really realize they were disappearing until like they were basically gone.
Yeah.
The only one who kind of knew it was coming, it was Spider-Man.
Yep, Peter Parker.
And so Peter Parker being, that sad moment actually brings it home. It wouldn't be dramatic otherwise. And, he's the most innocent of all of them. He has that deep connection with Tony Stark, and when he goes, Mr. Stark, I don't want to go. And he's scared as a little kid.
Yeah.
That's what breaks the audience. That's what sort of brings it home, the gravity of the situation. Because otherwise, you're not as engaged with it. The only way you're engaged with it was, I can't realize they killed that guy. I can't realize they killed this person. Like, Scarlet Witch is gone. That's a big loss. Oh, Black Panther is gone. That's a big loss.
Yeah,
but then when Spider-Man and Star-Lord, like some of the people you wouldn't expect, like basically all of the Guardians are gone except for Rocket. And then Spider-Man at the end was the one that kind of sort of brought it together. Obviously, Doctor Strange, before he was gone, had the cryptic statement, "This was the only way." Where
we're in the end game,
dramatic irony. You don't know what's going on, but you know that there's a plan in motion. You know that there is some amount of hope that the Avengers can actually go back and win.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then afterwards they bring it home for Thanos too, because he has that vision of Gamora as a child saying, "Did you do what you did? Yes. And what did it cost? It cost everything. It brings you home for Thanos as well, where he's maybe having second thoughts about what he did.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
yeah,
Sure.
so they were able to bring it together at some point. And you know, it had to take some amount of skill to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I think that we should bookend it here, and I think we should save the Avengers 4 speculation for another time, because
Okay.
yeah, I think this is a good amount of content, almost 2.5 hours, and you know, I'm sure that we can speculate for hours and hours and hours about Avengers 4. Yeah, but all in all, I mean, I feel like Infinity War really, you know, it had a nice, even though it's not the end of the Phase 3, so-called, I feel like it really had a nice bookend effect on the universe. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways that they can actually go from here, which, you know, to have a satisfying conclusion for, you know, all these stories, and then to actually have that conclusion open up so many avenues for the next movies that are coming out, I think it's going to be pretty cool to see, you know, what kind of logical ends they take it to.
Right. And, you know, just like a lot of people are comparing this movie to the Empire Strikes Back based on the way it ends. I feel like this is a lot more sad ending than Empire Strikes Back ever was, and the stakes are a lot higher. But you know, you're looking forward to the proper conclusion, but then you know you also are looking forward to the way they set themselves up for a complete reset. So Phase 4 can actually start from basically a blank slate. So it will be very interesting to see how they pull that off.
Yep.
I'm very, very eager to see how that turns out.
Yep, and we will revisit that in the next episode of did you think of a title for our podcast series? Think of anything?
I cannot think of anything.
Come on, man.
But the way you were setting up that ending, I was like, on the next episode of Dragon Ball Z, or Codename Kids Next Door. I think it also goes like that too.
That douchey
The
90s
Chemist
music.
Next Door.
The Chemist Next Door. Chem Talk, film chem, I don't know. See, this is, I don't know, man. We're scientists. Just draw a hexagon and we'll be happy.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for listening to us, and we will see you all next time.
Until the next time. Peace.
Peace.